Welcome to HP FanFiction. Support me by subscribing the channel. Also, like and share the video to keep me motivated to make more videos like these. Somewhere in the past between 1980 to 1981 AD. No matter how long Sal had been in the past, no matter how much he had learned to cope and to live in a way he hadn't before, some things had never changed. For all of Sal's knowledge, he had never been able to predict what happened next. Sal knew that mostly he was at fault for that. He and his old history professor Binns. In all the time in the past, there had been times and times again where Sal had cursed his younger self, who had never bothered to learn more about history than he had to. Sadly enough, even the few parts Sal had learned once had been lost after the individual test he had to pass. In other words, there had never been a time in the past that Sal knew more about than the basics, if at all. Sal had to admit that he had resented his past self a bit for that fact, but there had never been a possibility to change what had already happened, so Sal had accepted it over the millennia. So Sal was used to stumbling into situations he had no knowledge of. What he wasn't used to were dreams that seemed to be the contrary. Sal had dreamed 1,000 things over his lifetime. He had had nightmares, good dreams, splendid dreams and memories. He had been scared, excited, happy and sad in his dreams, but he had never had a dream like the one he had the night after he had revealed to Sirius that he was from the future. The forest was old, and oddly familiar, even if Sal, no matter how much he tried, couldn't remember why it looked so familiar. Sal walked the woods until he reached a familiar stone circle. Next to it, a man was leaning against a tree, his face shadowed and irrecognizable. "I am," Sal agreed and stepped forwards towards the man. "Why are you here?" The stranger seemed to smile, the shadows moving, and for a moment his eyes seemed to flash silver. "Because you need me," he said. "I've always come when you needed me, and I always will." Sal just stared at the man, and the stranger sighed. "Albus Dumbledore," he said. "He's the leader of the other resistance team in this war. He's working against the current Dark Lord, just like you are, yet you go out of your way to steer clear of him." "I won't forgive, because I can't forget," he countered, his eyes sad and bitter at the same time. "I will never forget," and as hard as it was the truth. He would never forget, never forgive. But then, some things shouldn't and couldn't be forgiven. And Albus Dumbledore, for all that he was the current leader of the Light, was a man who couldn't be forgiven from Sal's point of view, not for his deeds in the past, and not for his deeds in the future as well. "I never said you had to forgive him," the stranger calmly replied. "I've only pointed out that you steer clear of him." Sal shrugged. "It's the best thing I can do," he said. "He's the leader of the Light, and I can't go around and resent him openly." The stranger laughed at that. "Oh, my child," he exclaimed, "of course you can't." Then he shook his head. "But you won't be able to stay clear of him for forever? Sometimes, somewhere in the future, you will have to confront him. Sometimes you will have to acknowledge him and fight against his rule." Sal shrugged. "I don't care for his reputation or whatever," he countered. "He can be called the next coming of a trait for all I care." The man stepped away from the tree at that. His face. He was so familiar, so achingly beloved and familiar, and yet, no matter how much Sal sought to recognize him, he couldn't. Like a fog, restricting his vision, the stranger's face was kept from connecting to a name, no matter how much Sal knew that he should know the answer he sought for. "You should care," the stranger said, his silver eyes piercing. "You're my heir. No matter what, no mortal should decide your fate." And with a scream, Sal woke. Sadly enough, it wouldn't stay the only nightmare Sal had about the man. Instead, from that night on, the other man seemed to be part of Sal's dreams constantly, always watching, always judging, always there, and always in the woods they had met the first time. "Salvasahar," the stranger called him, his eyes always settled on him in a way that felt strangely familiar and yet so foreign. "My child," yet the words they spoke always differed. Sometimes there were apologies. "I'm sorry, Salvazar. I guess the most of what has happened to you is my fault, after all." Sometimes there were pleas. There's a boy, he's backed into a corner. It's your decision, but I wish you to take a second look at him. And sometimes there were explanations that didn't make sense. I needed you, Salvazar. You were born too late, and I needed you. And slowly but surely, the nightmares seemed to seep into the living world. Are you all right, Sal? Arcturus asked, concerned. You look distracted. Pater is seeing things again, Anna said. But no matter how light his tone of voice was, his eyes spoke of concern. Don't worry. A good bite should stabilize him. You're not biting Salan, Anastasius. Pollux immediately objected, and Anna pouted. Why? He whined. I want to have a snack, and Pater never objects. You are aware that you're a vampire and that vampires have often the oddest reactions to magical blood, aren't you? Arcturus countered. Anna sent him a pleading look in return. But I'm sure I won't react negatively at all when I snack on Pater, he said, pouting. Sal rolled his eyes. Go back to looking for a new smuggling route in York, he told his son. Snack later. Anna sniffed sadly. Nobody is ever nice to the poor vampire in their midst, he said with crocodile tears in his eyes and with a suppressed eye roll by both Pollux and Arcturus. The topic was forgotten. And if Sal let Anna eat from his wrist later on, it wasn't mentioned towards anybody else in the resistance, just like the concerned "Are you all right, Pater?" wasn't when Anna took Sal's wrist. Sal just hummed. Nightmares, he confessed. They won't stop, but yes, I'm all right. The first thing James heard when Sirius entered their home was the voice of a loudly complaining Salvazar. How by wind and fire do you always know where to find me, Black? He complained. You don't have my address, you don't send me owls, you just seem to wait for the next battlefield to pick me up and drag me somewhere. Yeah, well, if I want to get your address or another way to contact you sometimes in the future, I need to start interacting with you somehow. Sirius countered immediately. And you go out of your way to avoid me? That's because I've more than enough experience with blacks to know when to run, the healer answered. James watched amused while Sirius tried to push Salvazar into their kitchen. The healer was resisting, his hands on both sides of the door frame to avoid being pushed into the kitchen. Sirius, Lily said in that moment calmly, watching the byplay of Sirius pushing and Sal resisting. Do you really think it's necessary to use force to drag Salvazar in here? Sirius frowned at Lily. Do you know how hard it is to get him to go somewhere on his own accord when it is with me? He countered unhappily before pointing at Sal. He's even going out of his way to avoid me since the day you were trapped in that cave. With good reason, Salvazar countered while looking over his shoulder at the other man. You've been bothering me even more than Anna at his worst, and that means something. Who's Anna? James asked interestedly. The healer turned to look at James before rolling his eyes. The son of a Slytherin who turned out the most Gryffindor of all Gryffindors without ever going to Hogwarts as a student, he answered without answering at all. James blinked. Okay, he said slowly. Sirius, on the other hand, decided to use Sale's distraction to get the other man into the kitchen by poking him into the side. Sal winced, and Sirius used that to push the other man with a triumphant smile into the kitchen. James watched Sirius a bit amused, while Sal turned to frown at the other man. You're the worst, he told the Black. And that means something considering how many people I've gotten to know over my life. Sirius pouted. You're such a lily sometimes, he complained. One could think you were Rilla. He was stopped from saying more when the other man returned the poking with so much force that Sirius rescued himself with a squeal by hiding behind Lily. Did you just insult me? James' wife asked Sirius and turned to look at the hiding man with narrowed eyes. Never, Sirius immediately replied. You're perfect, Lils. Totally. James didn't even try to defend his brother in all but blood when his wife teamed up with the healer and decided to tickle him into submission. Instead, he continued to watch the other three interact while thinking that no matter how often he had met Sal before, he didn't know the healer at all. In the end, over the next few months, Sirius started to drag the healer he had met on the battlefield everywhere he went, and not only to James's home when he visited James and Lily. Nevertheless, While James had gotten to know the healer over their interactions thanks to Sirius's insistence on dragging him along, James couldn't say that he knew the other man well, Merlin. He couldn't even say if he liked the man or not. So when James ended up without Sirius on the battlefield in the care of the healer, he wasn't too sure if he could actually trust the man, not that he was actually in the condition to actually think about it. Instead, he was sitting in the middle of the battlefield, unable to focus on anything but the wound in his chest. He had been out with other Aurors who had been called to a disturbance in Hogsmeade, just to find out that the disturbance was a Death Eater raid and that James and the other 3 who had been sent were too few to stop them. They had been overwhelmed by the Death Eaters, and it didn't matter how good of a fighter James was, he and the others had been picked up one after another. James knew that at least one of his colleagues had died, and he wasn't sure about the other 2 who had been with them. The only thing he knew was that he had been hit by a cutting curse into the torso just a moment ago, and the way he was bleeding and the fact that he wasn't able to breathe anymore showed that it was even worse than it looked. Not that it looked good. Not feeling too good right now, are you? One of the Death Eaters surrounding James mocked him. You could join us, another one added. I'm sure the Dark Lord would even let you keep your little mudblood as a mistress if you truly wished it. James stared at the others, defiance in his eyes even while he felt himself shaking. The way his blood left his body, the red on his robes, it made him shudder just to think about it, but he couldn't show it in front of the enemy, so he turned his eyes towards his opponents and tried to ignore the rising panic inside him. I'm not joining you, he spat out, and for a moment he felt like he was about to go down coughing when his lungs suddenly didn't seem to have any air left. It was only his determination that stopped him from actually coughing and showing weakness. James wouldn't die while looking weak. Instead, he concentrated, blinked back the black spots dancing in front of his eyes, and then took aim to shoot another spell at one of the Death Eaters. It hit, bringing the man down, but a simple Expelliarmus took care of James's ability to defend himself. We should have guessed that. One of the Death Eaters grumbled and lifted his wand, clearly preparing to kill James. Potters have always been stubborn, after all. James guessed that he had a right to feel proud that his family was known for a trait like that. Sadly enough, his injuries prevented him from actually feeling more than pain and the panic when he noticed that it was harder and harder for him to breathe. Good, he pressed out instead, suppressing his urge to cough again. He heard a scoff from one of the Death Eaters, but his vision swam and he couldn't focus enough to see who had been the one to scoff. Not that he could actually recognize anybody with their masks, and the fact that the masks also had a charm to change a voice embedded. Stubborn Potter, one of them said. Let's kill him and continue on. He's not that important for the Dark Lathe. Before the Death Eater could finish his sentence, the sounds of apparition surrounded them, and the next moment there was spellfire all around them aimed at the Death Eaters. It seemed as if whoever had entered the fight definitely wasn't on the Death Eater's side. One of the Death Eaters turned to throw a curse towards James' sitting form, but one of the new-arrived strangers shielded him, and James' attention was drawn from the fight towards his wounds when he tore them while trying to avoid the incoming curse. James hissed, his eyes finding the wound. The blood, the way it left his body, and James refused to look closer and instead closed his eyes. His wound was bad enough, he didn't have to watch it as well. Nevertheless, the short look had been enough already. His breathing quickened with the panic raising in his chest, just to send him coughing when he was unable to breathe properly. Blood splattered on his clothing, coughed up just seconds before. James stared at the blood. His breathing quickened. The remembrance of his surroundings faded. His eyes and all of his attention was drawn to his blood and the wound on his chest. He felt the panic rising, and this time around, there were no Death Eaters threatening his life and forcing him to stay strong. His breathing tried to quicken even more, sending him coughing again, which made him panic even more. He shuddered, his hand reaching for his wound, feeling horror and shock running through him while he was trying to desperately get air. Still alive, there. James startled. His fast, labored breathing stopped for a second, and he forced his eyes open to look at the speaker. It was the healer. Salve Saha, James whispered, and refused to acknowledge it when some fluid decided to tickle down the corner of his mouth. He didn't even want to see what it was, but he suspected that it was some of the blood he had started to irregularly cough up over the last few minutes. That thought alone tried to quicken his breath again, which ended in another coughing fit. When his eyes finally focused on the face of the other man again, he could see that Sal's eyes, while his face was neutral, showed quite a bit of concern for him. "James." Sal returned the greeting and then knelt down next to him. The moment the other man knelt down, a shimmering ward erected around them. James was only able to see the ward for a second before it vanished into nothingness, or, well, it fully activated and therefore wasn't able to be seen after. "Calm down," the healer said, but James couldn't. His eyes had wandered to the blood on his clothing, and while he bit his lip to slow down his breathing, he couldn't keep the slower pacing. I'm dying," he forced out. "Lily, I can't leave, Lily, the baby." "Calm down," Salvizahar replied calmly. "You're not going to die. Just calm down." But James couldn't. Instead, his coughing returned with force. "Shh," the healer said, and a hand squeezed James's. "You're going to be fine. Concentrate on me. Breathe in, hold, breathe out." James tried, but instead he was still coughing, desperate to draw in another breath and yet absolutely unable to. "Calm down," Sal said while leaning over him, his voice turning sterner and was suddenly backed with power. "It's going to be all right. Just breathe. In, out, in." That did it. Finally, he managed to follow the instructions, unable not to at the command in the other one's voice. At long last the panic receded, leaving him with the nearly unbearable pain in his chest. "Good," Sal said, his voice calm and not at all panicky, as if he had seen wounds like that 1,000 times already. "Now, I need you to breathe through the pain, James," he told him. "Not about to give birth, am I?" James joked while having a hard time breathing, yet still trying to follow the instructions. "Oh, I hope not," Sal told him dryly. "This is definitely the wrong environment for you to give birth to your ego." "Ha!" James couldn't help but adore the man Sirius had basically strong-armed into interacting with them. It was maybe the first time that James actually had the chance to understand the man-crush Sirius harbored for the healer a bit better. The healer winked at him before suddenly resting his hands on both sides of the wound in James' chest. There was a sharp tuck and an all-surrounding pain that spread from the wound through all his extremities like wildfire. It felt like he had taken a hit with the Cruciatus, but while most of the pain was in the deepest part of his bones, it was different with his hands and feet, which felt as if energy was dancing on top of their skin instead. James screamed. "Breathe through the pain." He was harshly instructed by the healer kneeling next to him and torturing him. "For heaven's sake, James, breathe." So James tried to do like he had been instructed. He took huge, gulping yet shallow breaths, trying to breathe through the pain and bear it. Tears streamed down his face, and in between breathing he whimpered, even pleaded with the healer to stop, yet he breathed. "It's over soon," Sal assured him, and he sounded winded and as if he was in pain as well. "It's over soon. Wind and fire. I hate doing this when a person is still conscious, but I definitely can't knock you out here, so I fear you'll have to bear with it." It was then that the pain finally abated. James sucked in a desperate breath. "Keep breathing shallowly," Sal said, stopping him from drawing another deep breath. "I've not healed you yet." "But leaves, basically like a pain potion, or well, a variation of it," Sal countered before James could protest. "I fixed quite a bit of your chest already, but I still have to fix the rest." James wanted to look down, but before he could, Sal's bloody hand stopped him. "Don't look," he said. "I don't want you to panic again." James blinked, but in the end decided to trust Sirius's trust in the healer and continued to not look at his wound. "Will I live?" he asked instead, trying to make light of his situation. The other man snorted a bit amused. "If you keep still," he agreed, clearly understanding that James needed to make light of the situation. "Thank Merlin." James breathed out, feeling relived. "Don't move," the healer admonished him, and James straightened immediately. "I want to know what you're doing in my chest?" he asked a bit warily. Healing your organs, came the dry reply. James blinked, but didn't look down or change his breathing. My organs? He repeated, quite surprised that Sal's casual way of answering had actually kept him calm instead of sending him into another panic attack. Not the first time I'm doing something like that, the other man replied, but the most time people are unconscious when I do it. James blinked again. Sounds like you've done that often already, he said, trying for casual. How many years of experience ensured that you're now so calm when looking at wounds like mine? For a moment he solely heard the soft laugh of the healer. Then he got an answer. Decades, the other man replied. Centuries, millennia. Decide on one and keep that in mind as my answer. James wanted to snort at that, but refrained since he remembered his instruction not to move his chest too much. Do you change your name with each answer I chose? James asked, looking up into the sky while trying to ignore the sound of the battle surrounding them. I might, Sal replied, a bit amused. If you want me to, I can. My name is long enough to do so without trouble. James rolled his eyes, a bit amused. Let me guess, traditionally named, he said. You're not a fan of traditional naming? The other man countered. James wanted to shrug, but stopped himself from doing so in the last second. James wanted to scoff. What kind of reason does giving a child 3 names have? He countered. It's a way to specify the child in magic, the other man replied calmly. We're bound to magic by our name and ancestry. There is a reason why there are so many legends about the true name having power. The answer was a laugh. Emrys was the counter. The Fae, Pendragon, Grim. Grim? I can't actually deny that, he agreed, forcing his eyes to stay on the sky instead of looking at the other man. Don't worry, the other man said, as if sensing James's distress at the mentioning of the Grim name. I won't go around tell anybody. That stopped James breathing for a second. You know, he aspirated slowly. I do, the other man replied calmly. I knew your father. James frowned. I can't remember ever seeing you before Sirius ensured that we met, he countered. We met, the healer replied, sounding a bit amused. But as far as I remember, you were more interested in flying than meeting the boring adult who had come to meet your father. That actually made James blink. Adult, he repeated incredulously, his eyes traveling to the other man's face, who looked about as old as James. Adult, the other man replied, amused. Aging has always been a bit of a problem for me. James blinked. Problem? He asked, a bit amused. I can't imagine ever hearing anybody calling it a problem when they age slower than normal, the healer snorted, amused. I think you've never heard my answer about experience ever before as well, he countered. There's a reason why I gave you that answer. James contemplated that. You knew me as a child? He finally concluded. I knew your parents, the other man corrected. I only met you once as a child. James wasn't too sure if he should be happy about that or a bit sad that the other man was a stranger for him when he had known his parents. Did you know them? Well, I did, the healer replied softly. I worked with them for years in the last war. James frowned at that. In the last war? Grindelwald? He asked, surprised and a bit confused. Grindelwald, the other man agreed. But you don't like Dumbledore, James said, confused. Shouldn't you? There are personal reasons why I can't work with him, Sal replied calmly, and James couldn't help but take note of the coolness in the other man's voice when he spoke about the headmaster. And only some of them have to do with the war surrounding Grindelwald. At that, the other man took his hands from James's chest. James blinked. What? He asked, but was interrupted by the healer. Try to take a deep breath, he said, and James, still feeling a bit stumped at the abrupt change, did as he was told. Nothing hurt. The healer nodded. Good, he said, and lifted a hand to destroy the ward surrounding them. James watched, surprised, a spell shooting over his head, showing him that the fight obviously wasn't over with. The healer threw an annoyed look towards the one who had cast the spell. When a second came hurling at them, a simple flick of Salvazar's fingers ensured that another runic spell stopped the approaching spell. Sal rolled his eyes. Some people are stupid, he said, sounding oddly dry with amusement. This is Hogsmeade. If someone wants to actually have a chance in a fight, this is the worst place to choose. Before James could ask about those words, spellfire came at them from two sides at once. The healer frowned, and a second later James couldn't help but wonder if the man wasn't able to bend the wards of Hogwarts to his will. Wards sprung up all around them, surrounding the last of the Death Eaters and preventing them from throwing even more spells at them. "Really, Sal?" a familiar man with a hood over his face said dryly. "Couldn't you have done that earlier?" "I was preoccupied," Sal answered. "Why? Did you mind, Archie?" The other man snorted, amused. "A bit help is always appreciated," he countered, and his hooded head turned when his gaze took in the Death Eaters, who had been stunned by some of the others after they had been surrounded by wards which let others stun them, but prevented them from cursing others themselves, especially if it's help like that. Sal threw him an amused look. "I'll not always be able to help like that, and you know that, don't you?" he countered. Archie snorted. "You mean this is a special occasion?" he asked, amused. "Sure it is." Another man, who was also wearing a hood, spoke up. "Here's Hogsmeade. Pater's always been more powerful here." Anocel spoke up from next to James. "Shh, some things aren't what you blurt out like that in the middle of the street." "I'm sorry," the new stranger immediately corrected himself. "I meant Salvasahar's always been more powerful here. Do you know how odd it is to say your first name, Pater?" James couldn't help but feel amused at the healer's exasperated look. "Not what I meant, and you know it, Anna," he told the other man, a bit amused. "And now, off you go. We both know the fight here was more action than I wanted you to be involved in." The stranger immediately pointed at the man next to him. "Archie dragged me here," he defended himself. "He said we needed more manpower." The healer turned and looked at Archie with a raised eyebrow. Said man shrugged, clearly unrepentant. "Polly dared me," he said, as if the dare was a very important reason to drag somebody else into a fight. And Marius was in the room. The last thing was said in a very resigned way, which meant that if you hadn't done it he would, Sal concluded with a sigh. "I should have guessed that introducing you to Anna would have consequences like that." The two men and another standing basically right beside them looked at each other guiltily. "But if you hadn't, we'd have only half as much fun as we do," the stranger, who had been called Anna, countered with a pout that could even be heard through his voice. "You wouldn't stop us from having fun, would you?" Salvasaher sighed and buried his head in one of his hands. James snorted. "Feeling like the dad with your people, Salvasaher?" he asked, amused. The healer returned James's amused glance with an eye roll. "You have no idea," he agreed before he turned back to the man called Anna. "Didn't I tell you to leave?" "You're so mean," the other man whined, but when Sal sent him another sharp glance, he actually turned on the spot and apparated away. "I can see that your control of Anna is absolute," Archie commented dryly. Sal snorted. "No," he countered, "but he knows how far he can push me before I snap. Normally, he tries to avoid that." James couldn't help but snort. "Sounds like me and my dad," he said, only grimacing slightly when he remembered the death of his father. Archie and Polly snorted, amused. Sal, on the other hand, threw James a half-annoyed, half-amused look. "Guess I'm related to your dad, then," the healer commented dryly. "And Anna with you?" At that, he scrutinized James closely. "I guess there's a reason why Anna's always been influencing Black or been influenced by Blacks to get into trouble." Polly snickered. "Guess that means that the Blacks have the best chances to take over the world one day," he said, amused. Sal threw the hooded man an annoyed look. "Anna won't go around and help the Blacks to take over the world," he countered. "No," Archie agreed, "but if Anna walks into danger because the Black family and he are taking over the world, you'd go and pull him out again, and consequently would take over the world for all of them." James snorted. "I can see that," he agreed, his eyes traveling around the street where he could see unconscious Death Eater lying all over. Sal threw him an annoyed look at that as well. "Thanks, James," he said dryly. "You're welcome," James immediately replied a bit cheekily, just to turn serious the next moment. "The others with me, are they?" "Safe, the most of them," Archie replied. "One of them died. The others are hurt, and we sent 2 of them to St. Mungo's for treatment. The last is still here." He's not hurt that much." James felt relief coursing through him at that answer. "The Ministry is sending people," one of the other strangers surrounding them said in that moment. His voice sounded familiar. For a moment James wondered if Garrick Ollivander was part of Salvazar's group, since the stranger's voice sounded like that. Sal nodded. "We're going," he agreed. "But—" James was stopped by a hand on his shoulder. "We can't stay," Salvazar said. "The Ministry is far too interested in our people, and Dumbledore as well, for us to stay." James guessed that he could understand that. "Wait," he said when the others of Sal's group started to operate away one after the other. Salvazar stopped and turned back to James with a questioning look on his face. "Can't you, I know that Sirius drags you everywhere when he finds you, but, well, can't you give us a way to contact you? You're a friend after all, even if you're more Sirius's friend than Lily's and mine right now." The healer scrutinized James at that, then he sighed. "Owls addressed to Salvazar Malfoy should find me," he said. James snorted. "How by Merlin do you write that?" Sal looked at him in amusement before he flicked his hand at James. "Just like that," he said, amused, and apparated away. James blinked, frowned, raised his hand to scratch his head, just to see writing on the back of his hand which looked like written with black ink. James guessed that it was Sal's name, but he couldn't read it. It was written in runes. James rolled his eyes towards nobody. "Thanks, Salvazar," he said dryly. "That really helps." Later he would end up going to Lily and with her help would be able to change the writing to a lettering that he could actually understand. "Guess he has your sense of humor," Sirius commented amused when he came by while James and Lily translated the words. "Are you sure that you're not related?" James saw it as totally justified when he cursed his friend to talk backwards for the rest of the day. "Have you ever thought about naming our child traditionally?" "What do you mean traditionally?" "Like the mother chose a name, the father does, and the godfather does." "So, 3 names?" "Yes, 3 names." For a moment, Lily thought about it. "And everybody would be able to choose a name?" "Yes." "Without anybody else influencing the other's naming choice?" "Yes." Lily smiled. "Why not?" she said. "It sounds like a good idea, especially because we've never seen eye to eye when it came to children's names." James sighed and nodded. He guessed that he would have to live with the fact that his wife would choose his son's first name. Over time, Sal started to interact with Sirius more and more. Even with his knowledge of a long-forgotten future version of his godfather, Sal had to admit that he didn't know the other man at all. Sirius was brilliant. Insane, but definitely brilliant. "James and I were confronted by the Dork Lord today," Sirius told him happily before sinking in the chair on the opposite of the table. Sal had chosen today. Lily wasn't happy, but she's a scary witch, and well, I guess she taught the Dork Lord fear today. "Do I even want to know what happened?" Sal countered, and with an internal sigh said his quiet evening goodbye. It seemed that his godfather had a sixth sense for whenever Sal chose to go to the Leaky Cauldron for any kind of meal. The other man definitely had developed a habit of turning up only minutes after Sal had sat down and ordered in the last few weeks. "Ah, maybe not," Sirius offered. Well, we all got out alive and now Lily wants you to teach her runes." Sal raised an eyebrow at that. "And why should I do that?" he countered. Sirius shrugged. "Because she is a scary lady and I definitely will bring her to you because I like to stay alive." Sirius answered, and when Sal just looked at him in disbelief, the other man shrugged and added, "Hormones are scary things and they do even more scary things to the woman they've possessed." "You make them sound like an evil ghost," Sal pointed out dryly at that. Sirius shrugged unconcerned. "It's the truth, no matter how it sounds," he countered, and then leaned backwards in his chair. "So, will you teach her?" Sal opened his mouth to answer, but was interrupted by Sirius before he could. "And just so you know, if you say no, Lily will hunt you down and force you to teach her anyway. She's scary like that." "Your description of her sounds very one-sided," Sal said instead of answering. "Are you sure you're not biased when it comes to her?" Sirius, on the other hand, obviously didn't seem to mind the description, because he solely shrugged with his shoulders. She's your ancestor, he pointed out. Shouldn't you be as concerned as I when it comes to her? I mean, shouldn't you be used to her? Sal rolled his eyes. I'm far too old to be worried about a woman not even half my age, no matter our actual relationship, Sal countered. So don't try to scare me with her behavior. Sirius pouted. I should have guessed something like that, he finally said, sighing. Will you teach her anyway? For a moment, Sal's gaze turned distant. I might be persuaded, he finally agreed. At least when it comes to the basics. And like that, Lily Potter and Sal Sanctuary started to work together on theories of runes and magic older than even the oldest written account in the vaults of the British wizarding world. Theoretically, Lily said, looking at the parchment on theory in front of her. If I changed the sequence here, wouldn't it change the whole spell? Sal looked down at the parchment. It would, he said. But a change like that would turn the spell ineffective. If you'd want to keep it effective, you'd have to change the spell over there as well, and then the spell wouldn't be a simple protection anymore. Lily frowned at that. What do you mean it wouldn't be a simple protection anymore? She asked, confused. It would still be the same spell, wouldn't it? Sal shook his head. It would change the meaning, he said. Shortening the spell like that would ensure that it'd be more powerful in the end, maybe even powerful enough to stop a killing curse. But it also wouldn't function without a lot of magic. Lily frowned. So? It would drain you dry, Sal said, frowning as well. It would require every inch of your magic and then some. I'm sure if you didn't care about dying and maybe killing a second person as well in the process, well then a spell like that would be the ideal way to... Sal trailed off, his academic interest suddenly drying up with a single thought. Sal? Lily asked, and looked at him. Written like that. It's a sacrificial spell, Sal continued, his eyes suddenly fixed on a scene only he could see in his head. You'd have to love the one you'd want to protect more than your life, more than your partner's life, for it to be effective. 2 sacrifices, 2 lives, for one to stay alive. James, eyes open and unseeing on the floor of the living room, dead by Avada Kedavra. Lily, pleading for the life of her son, dying by the killing curse, sacrificial magic. Sal didn't believe in coincidence. So, the spell like it is would require 2 lives to work. Lily asked with a frown. Does that mean I'd have to kill myself? No, Sal said and swallowed harshly. As long as you mean to sacrifice yourself for the one you want to protect, no matter how you die, the spell would activate, a soul rune on the forehead of the one you want to protect, full of your intent. Well, if you wanted it to be, it would be enough. 1 rune? Lily asked, and looked at the short sequence of runes in front of her, a specific one. Sal shrugged. To activate spells like that in a single rune, you need intent and practice, he said. I wouldn't recommend it. Doing a spell like that as a layman is dangerous. Doing it with a single rune and no protection against that kind of magic, it's more than stupid. Lily blinked. But you told me I'm nearly good enough that I can actually do my protection soon, she said with a frown. After that, I should be safe. Sal sighed and nodded. Yes, he agreed. Just don't try and use one of the spells as long as you're not done with your protection. I'd hate to lose you to insanity because you didn't listen. I won't try anything without the protections, Lily agreed. Nevertheless, that shortcut with a single rune. Which one? The one that feels right for you, Sal answered. Runes don't have a universal shortcut. It's your magic and your intent, so the rune symbolizing the shortcut has to be chosen by you as well. Lily nodded thoughtfully and looked at the potential spell in front of her. I think, she said, her gaze not leaving the spell in front of her, if I had to choose, I'd choose Sedwyo, the sun rune and the rune for victory. It looks right, somehow, you know. And with those words, she traced an invisible lightning bolt on the table. Sometimes, Sal hated fate. Nevertheless, in the end he took a deep breath, told himself that no matter what he did, the ending would still be the same, and then continued to teach Lily. Of course, after hearing Sal's words about sacrificial magic, Lily wouldn't let it go, so while she didn't test the spell or others, and still worked diligently on her runic protection, she also came to Sal more and more with questions about the possibility she had found and written out trials on paper. Since parchment was a lot easier to charge with magic, so using paper was safer for spells like the one she was working on. Sal hated it, but after the initial protest, he had stopped any kind of trying to persuade her differently. Then, a few weeks into teaching Lily, she came to their meeting with another woman in tow. "Sal," she said, "this is Pandora Lovegood. She has been interested in meeting you." "My prince," Pandora spoke up. "Daddy told me I had to talk to you if I wanted to join the fight against the current dark wizard." Lily frowned at that. "Wait, you didn't tell me you wanted to meet him because of— Well, I thought you weren't planning on joining the group of the professor," Pandora pointed out, her eyes resting dreamily on Lily. "So I didn't think you were interested in knowing, or are you also planning on joining Sanctuary's group and fear now that he will choose me because he's familiar with my father?" Sal looked at Pandora in amusement. "You could have simply talked with your father," he pointed out. "I think that Garrick Ollivander would have been agreeable and brought you to one of our meetings. But if I had done that, Lily would have never thought about joining your group." Pandora countered airily and smiled at Sal. Lily next to her gawked. "Why should I even think? Why do you think that I should—" "Pandora." Pandora just patted her friend's arm. "It's all right, Lily," she said. "I understand. You're pregnant and a bit hormonal." Lily groaned. "Somehow I suddenly regret bringing you with me," she told her friend before turning to look at Sal. "Anyway, Sal," she added, "explain to me what I'm doing wrong with my shortcut," and with that handed him her trials on paper. In the end, it ended with Sal teaching both women the wards Lily had started on already. That night, Sal woke breathing heavily and shaking. His eyes searched the darkness of his current bedroom, but whatever he had dreamed, it hadn't followed him to reality. "There's a boy. He's backed into a corner. It's your decision, but I wish you to take a second look at him." And the only impression of the speaker were dark shadows, a hidden face and eyes like the moon. "You're my balance." Sal shook and curled into himself. Balance. Oddly enough, there was no word Sal wanted to hear less than that one. A week later, Sal came to Lily and his usual meeting point in one of the more discreet rooms in the Leaky Cauldron. He was a few minutes late thanks to some happenings with the Resistance, but no matter what, he hadn't expected to run into that kind of conversation. "I wish I was pregnant as well," Pandora said just before Sal entered, and he stopped in the middle of opening the door. "But I fear it will have to wait a bit longer. My husband Xenophilius told me that our future daughter should only been born in a year, so we decided to wait until we're certain that she will be in the class below your son in Hogwarts." Lily snorted at that. "My son?" she repeated, amused. "You are aware that neither James nor I know the gender of our future child, are you? It's not something that people can tell you until the child is born." "I know," Pandora replied, and there was a smile in her voice. "But you should also be aware that the legendary name is the Immortal Prince, not the Immortal Princess." "Are you— What are you talking about, Pandora?" Lily's voice asked, confused. "Lore and facts," Pandora replied softly, sounding a bit mad while saying it. "Superstitions and beliefs, whatever you want to name it, I'm talking about it." Lily snorted. "You're weird," she declared, but it sounded fond. "You've always been weird." "I'm my father's daughter," Pandora replied immediately. "What did you expect? A more mellowed version of him, considering that half of your genetics comes from your mother," Lily offered, still sounding amused. Pandora laughed. True," she agreed. "That could have happened if I wasn't an Ollivander. We only tend to inherit what is useful for our bloodline and gift." Lily snorted. "That sounds like something a Death Eater would say," she pointed out, her amusement a bit less than before. "Why?" Pandora asked, sounding curious and a bit amused herself. "Because I talk about bloodlines. It's natural. It has nothing to do with the Death Eater's views. I have a magical bloodline, your husband has. You have— everybody has." Lily's frown could be heard in her voice when she spoke up next. "I'm a Muggle-born," she pointed out. "I don't have any familial connections to the magical world before I married." "Of course you did," Pandora immediately objected. "It might have been centuries ago since your family last was connected to the magical world. But one time, it's a fact that magic doesn't just turn up. It needs to be introduced into lines by either wizards, witches, or magical beings who married into your family at one time in the past." "That sounds actually pretty plausible," Lily said slowly, sounding surprised. "Of course it's plausible," Pandora replied. "It's true, after all." Then, before Lily could say anything else, Pandora spoke up again. "What will you name him?" Lily was silent for a minute, obviously thrown by Pandora's change of topic. James told me about that custom," she said slowly. "The wizarding way to name children. We decided to use that way for our child. Well, if it's a boy, I'm contemplating Harry." "I wouldn't choose a name like that," Pandora immediately objected. Sal could basically hear Lily frown. "Why?" "A traditional name would be easier for the child to ensure that he fits in later on," Pandora pointed out. "We tend to gravitate towards unusual names, or names that don't even exist in the Muggle world." "I like the name Harry," Lily countered. "You could keep it," Pandora's dreamy reply came immediately. "A nickname like that could be short for Henry, Harold." "I don't think those names fit," Lily interrupted. "Harold, not better than Harold." Pandora laughed at that. "How about Harry James?" she suggested, amused. For a moment there was silence. Then Lily spoke up slowly. "Harry James?" she asked, changing the single name into two. "No," Pandora corrected her gently. "Harry James, one name. It's a very old, traditional name. It's mostly been used as a second or third name in the Lefay family, and basically died out the minute the family vanished from the magical world." For a moment or two Lily didn't answer. Then she said slowly, "That might actually be a good option," she agreed. "I definitely like how the name sounds." Before Sal could even think about revealing himself or stepping away from the door, Pandora looked at him. "And how do you like that name?" she asked, looking directly at Sal. Sal sighed. "I definitely don't mind it," he finally settled on. "And I guess you're right, Pandora. Harry James is definitely one of the older magical names." That was the first time Sal actually started to understand that his Atra might have been right the day he named Sal Harry James after his mother's wish. It was an odd revelation after Sal had thought his Atra to be wrong about his assumption for so long. In the end, that day only fed his nightmares at night. "Please consider Salvasahar Serendu Harry James. Please, he's just a boy after all." Nightmares after nightmares, fed by memories, present and future. When Pandora came for the first time to the meeting of the Resistance, Sal wasn't too sure if he wouldn't regret it in the end, because at the end of the meeting she was sitting next to Anna and talking animatedly. "You're looking concerned," Garrick Ollivander said, watching Pandora and Anna as well. "You aren't?" Sal countered, his eyes not leaving his son and the woman he was talking to. "My daughter and your son," Ollivander replied. "It's either world domination or hell on earth, if they manage to work together for them. So no, I'm not concerned." Sal threw his old friend an amused look. "That's the reason why I am," he pointed out before his eyes narrowed. "My son? How did you come to the conclusion that Anna's my son?" "The way you act, he can't be anything but your son," Ollivander countered. Then he threw Sal an amused look. "Of course, there's also the fact that he's always looking at you, following you with his eyes and always looking for your approval," he added. "Not to mention that he's been calling you Pater from the beginning in a way that suggests that he's used to addressing you like that." Sal snorted. "That's one word I will never be able to get rid of in his vocabulary," he agreed with a sigh. "I don't think that Anna has even once called me by my first name. I've never even tried to get him to call me anything else." "I know the feeling," Ollivander agreed and looked at his daughter. "Pandora's still calling me Daddy, and I bet that she won't ever call me something else as well." Sal watched the two children with a frown on his face, a frown that just deepened when Marius, Arcturus and Pollux decided to join them. I guess for your son and my daughter, it's going to be world domination, Ollivander said dryly next to him. Otherwise the blacks wouldn't feel drawn to their planning like moths to the flame. Sal sighed, but otherwise couldn't actually do anything else but agree. Pandora, Anna, and the blacks, well, a combination couldn't end in something good, at least not for the opposition. Just a few days later, Death Eaters all over learned to feel afraid of something new. Did it really have to be hares? Sal asked his son, exasperated. Anna looked at him innocently. Should it be something else, he asked, innocently. I mean, they're related to rabbits who are small and fluffy and cuddly, but at the same time they aren't, so having people be afraid of them would seem logical, wouldn't it? Sal opened his mouth to reply, thought about it, decided that it wouldn't matter what he said, and closed it again. If you think so, he finally agreed. There was a reason why Luna Lovegood would end up with a hare as a patroness charm. Of course, after that incident, there were many more, with Pandora and Anna working together more often than not, something that didn't even change when Pandora dragged Lily to one of the meetings. Pandora, why? This is the meeting of the Night Witches, Pandora interrupted her and forced her friend to sit down next to Cassandra Black and Andromeda Tonks. We need another witch or two to help us. Lily stared at her friend. Night Witches, she repeated, but confused. We've been active since Grindelwald, dear, Cassandra assured Lily. We have the best toys. Lily blinked, then turned back to Pandora, deciding to ignore the woman next to her. I'm pregnant, she pointed out with a frown. And totally frustrated with how you've been forced to sit by since the Order of the Phoenix found out, Pandora pointed out. As a Night Witch, you would be in the middle of the fight without actually being in the thick of it. Lily frowned. What do you mean I would be in the fight without being in the thick of it? She asked, and watched when the others around her started to smirk at each other. Let's just say we have our way, Andromeda Tonks offered, amused. Pandora loves it. Of course I do, Pandora agreed immediately. It's flying and action and a lot of fun. Before Lily could say anything about that, another person spoke up. Of course it is, a male voice said, and Lily turned to look at a young pale man with black hair and an oddly sharp smile. It's something that Pater would call a way to live out our Gryffindor side. Cassandra Black snorted. You're the only one who's a Gryffindor here, she pointed out, amused. The man pouted. I'm not a Gryffindor, he countered. I never went to school at Hogwarts. But only because you're a vampire, one of the other black women countered. The man crooked his head in a thoughtful look. No, he finally declared. I don't think that's it. His thoughtful gaze traveled through the room until it suddenly enlightened. He said. I remember why I never went. I've always been too learned for Hogwarts. Then his gaze turned sad. Doesn't mean that Pater doesn't call me a Gryffindor anyway, he added, even if he has no evidence that I actually am one to begin with. A lot of the women surrounding the table snorted in amusement at that. What? That's Anna, Pandora interrupted Lily. He's the only male with the exception of Marius, who's part of the Night Witches. Anna, Lily repeated the name and looked at the man with a frown. The vampire shrugged and Pandora snickered. He argued that since his name sounds female, he should be allowed to be here. Andromeda spoke up, amused. We gave up arguing against it after Pandora joined him on his side, and since then he's been officially part of us. Oh, all right, Lily said, and then turned towards Pandora again. I know you meant well, Pandora, but I'm still pregnant. Her voice was pointed when she repeated the most important part about her situation. So? Pandora said, we use brooms and you don't show much right now, and even if you will have to take a break in between, you won't stay pregnant, and there are always women staying behind to watch the children, so I don't see a problem. Lily opened her mouth, gawked, closed it again, and then blinked. Good point, she finally agreed before going on to another argument. But James and Sirius wouldn't be happy with the boys, Pandora countered. They can stay on as consultants. I don't think them stumbling into our fights justifies them to call consultants. Cassandra countered. I'd call them accidental temporary acquisitions. We don't buy them, Andromeda countered. I think accidental helpers might fit even better. Lily could only stand by and blink when the whole thing ended into a discussion. How they should call James and Sirius and their accidental work relationship with Salvazar and the Resistance. You see, Anna said, leaning over Lily's shoulder, you fit here totally. Lily winced, surprised by the sudden voice in her ear. And don't forget you're your own person, Anna added. You don't have to do everything together with your husband. Lily turned to look over the shoulder and at the vampire. I know, she said, but I'm also not too sure if I should go and join another organization against you-know-who without telling him. The vampire shrugged. Then tell him, talk about it and then decide, he said. We'll still be there if you decide to work with us after talking with him. Of course, Lily had no idea that being introduced basically meant being part of the Night Witches. After that day, she would be in contact with everybody from there, and in the end, it would only take 2 weeks for her to give in and go on her first mission with the Night Witches. From then on, Lily would be part of them until her untimely death nearly 2 years later. When Sal found out that Lily had joined the Night Witches, he just shook his head at his son. I can't believe you went and involved Lily, one of Dumbledore's people, in the Night Witches, Sal said to Anna. And don't tell me that it was Pandora's fault. You two are thick as thieves, since you met each other, so don't act as if you had no idea what she planned. Anna shrugged. I thought her idea was good, he countered. Sal sighed. All right, he gave in. Just don't teach her overly dangerous things. With my luck, she'll find another way to kill herself even faster. Then using a sacrificing ritual? Anna asked, amused. I don't believe there are any faster ways left, Peter. Sal just sighed, not really able to counter Anna's argument. Nevertheless, he finally said, at least try to keep her alive for now. Anna smirked. You and I know that she won't die, he countered immediately. So don't worry too much. Nothing too bad will happen to her, for now. And wasn't that a depressing thought? Because in the end it had been Sal who had ensured that Lily would be able to end her life the way she had when he had been a 15-month-old child. It had been Sal who had ensured his survival and the death of his parents. Sal wasn't sure if he would ever forgive himself for that. That night, Sal would wake soaked in sweat. I'm sorry, Salvazar. I guess the most of what has happened to you is my fault, after all. And the image of a boy drowning in a cave locked in his mind. You look distracted, Sirius said while sitting down in front of Sal. Said man looked up and just sighed when he saw that Sirius had found him again just after he had sat down in his chair in the leaky cauldron. And you're still always there whenever I decide to stop here for a bite to eat, Sal countered. Tell me, do you sleep here, or how come you haven't missed meeting me here for months? Sirius grinned and then shrugged. Well, I have to keep in contact with you somehow, he pointed out. Sal just rolled his eyes. You could owl me, he said. Sirius snorted. As if you'd read it, he countered. Since the day I found out that you're from the future, you have been avoiding me. You haven't come to Lily and James's. You haven't agreed to meet me anywhere, and you even seem to steer clear of me on the battlefield. A skill I'm definitely impressed by, considering how often I run across your group there. Sal opened his mouth, but Sirius interrupted him before he could get further. And don't tell me it's coincidence. I'm not stupid, you know, he said pointedly. Pad Daddy, Sal said. That's Dogfather to you. Sirius immediately corrected, not even thinking about it anymore after all the time Sal had used Pad Daddy on him over the last months. It seemed to have turned into Sal's standard nickname for Sirius, no matter how often the other man corrected him. Dogfather, Sal agreed, and for a moment Sirius wanted to let go his observations, but in the end he knew it wouldn't help them at all if he did. Salvazar, he said instead, suddenly oddly serious for his normal cheerful demeanor. What's going on? Sal shook his head. It's nothing, he answered when Sirius didn't relent. Just dreams, maybe nightmares. Sirius raised an eyebrow and Sal shrugged helplessly. I dream about a man leaning against a tree in a forest, watching me, he explained. I know him. I'm absolutely sure that I know him, but no matter how often I try to think about him in my waking time, I can't remember where I have seen him before. It's there, but it feels like it's buried beneath everything else, and I can't grasp it. Sal shook his head tiredly. Dreaming and questioning my dream, well, it doesn't help with the whole war situation and everything, he added, and rubbed his eyes. Sirius frowned. I don't think I get why you think your dream is important, he finally said slowly. Sal shrugged. I don't get it as well, he said a bit helplessly. It's just, something tells me I saw the man in the forest before, and whenever I saw him, the situation was anything but ideal for me. It puts me on edge. You saw him before in less ideal situations, Sirius repeated. What do you mean less ideal situations? Sal just sighed. Uncle Nick's potions accident that nearly killed him, he answered slowly. My mind tells me the stranger of my dreams was there, but my own memory tells me he wasn't. When London was swamped by the plague, well, it's the same. He was there, yet he wasn't as well. It's confusing and it's giving me a headache. And you know him and yet don't know him from these instances. Sirius confirmed Sal's words. Yes, no, maybe, Sal sighed. I know that I know him. I met him, but while I'm sure that I should remember, I don't, and it's driving me crazy. Literally the way you look. Sirius agreed, amused, before grabbing Sal's arm. So, up you go, let's go and visit James and Lily. Lily will be happy for the company. She looks like she's about to pop, you know. Sal rolled his eyes at that. It's the 30th of July. I'm not going anywhere near her, right? He was interrupted by Sirius, who simply sighed along, apparated him to Godric's Hollow. Are you insane? Was the first thing Sal said the moment they reappeared in front of Lily and James's house. I told you that I wasn't interested in coming here, so why by wind and fire did you drag me here anyway? You need a distraction. And Lily will provide it. I'm sure of it, Sirius answered with a shrug. Lily is heavily pregnant, Sal countered pointedly. The only distraction she could do in the moment would be to give birth, and I have absolutely no interest in that kind of distraction. You're a healer, so a woman potentially giving birth shouldn't keep you away, Sirius said dismissively. Sal just stared at Sirius with a frown. It's Lily, he pointed out. So? Lily. Oh. Sadly, Sirius understood the implications that Sal wanted him to understand a bit too late, because before Sal could flee the scene, the door opened and James stepped out of it. The man blinked in surprise at them, then smiled. Hey, Sirius. Salve-her. James, Sal returned the greeting with a mental sigh. If you wonder why I'm here, no. Considering your admirer next to you, I can guess it already, James answered, amused. No need to explain. Hey! Sirius immediately protested. I'm not admiring anything. Sorry, Padfoot. James gave in before turning back to Sal and correcting himself. Your pet, then? Seal snorted, amused, while Sirius next to him spluttered. Pet? Just because I'm a dog. Don't finish that sentence, Sal interrupted him. Amused. It could make everything worse, Pad Daddy. Oye, that's Dogfather to you. Dogfather? James looked with amused interest from one person to the other. Do I want to know, or is it better if I stay oblivious? He asked the other two. Sirius flushed, and Sal smirked. James blinked, staring at Sal for a moment, uncomprehending, and then he started to roar with laughter. Sirius pouted. You are the worst, he finally declared. One meaner than the other. We love you too, Pad Daddy, James replied while snickering. Sirius growled. Sal, on the other hand, rolled his eyes, still amused by the antics. Then James gestured towards the door. I guess you're here to entertain two heavily pregnant ladies, he asked, amused, and Sal's amusement immediately vanished. Two? He repeated, suddenly not amused at all. Who else? Alice Longbottom is here, James interrupted him. I know you two haven't met, but don't worry, I'm sure you'll get along quite well. Sal suddenly had a flashback to a time long gone. Neville. There was something about Neville that he should know which correlated with the current date, but considering how old that memory was, it was a bit like chasing fog. Sal was sure that he would remember it eventually, his inherited memory from his H.R. made sure of it. The question was if he'd remember it in time. I'm not sure if I want to get along, Sal finally settled on. Maybe I should go and come by at a later time, like in 2 to 3 days. Ah, no, Sirius countered. I know you seem to be deadly afraid of a heavily pregnant Lily, but forget it. We go in there and visit. It's been months since you came by last." "There was a reason for it," Sal mumbled, but didn't object when Sirius grabbed him and dragged him into the house. A reason that Sal saw as justified, especially when barely an hour later Alice went into labor. "You're a healer," Sirius said when Sal told him to get St. Mungo's. "So," Sal countered and stared at Sirius angrily, "the last time I had something to do with labor was at least a century or two ago. Do you know how much can change in a time like that? And that's not even considering that birthing in Mungo's might be better for the mother and the child in the long run. Better aftercare for mother and child and so on." Sirius frowned, but then nodded. "Will you at least look after her until St. Mungo's gives us a portkey or sends a healer?" he asked, and Sal rolled his eyes a bit annoyed. "I'm a healer," he pointed out. "Of course I will look after her until then." That didn't mean that Sal was happy about it. At least now his brain seemed to finally think it important to point out that once upon a time Sal had known that Neville was born on the 30th of July. Sirius nodded and then left the room to reach the fireplace and call St. Mungo's. James, who had left the moment they recognized what was happening, returned to the room. "I've sent a Patronus to Frank," he said. "But he's working. There was a big raid in Norfolk and basically every Auror on duty was called to help there. It might take hours until he can come here. In other words, we're alone." Sal sighed. He had already ensured that Alice was sitting comfortable and in a position that would ease her giving birth, just in case she ended up giving birth before a healer of St. Mungo's was viable. Sadly enough, it was likely that St. Mungo's would be late. They knew that Sal was here, and thanks to Sirius they knew that Sal was trained. A witch giving birth in the presence of a maybe home-trained healer was a lot less urgent than a lot of other cases, especially with a raid going on at the same time. "I'm never going to forgive you for this, Sirius," Sal swore. "Never." Of course, in the end it just got worse when Lily also went into labor just minutes after Alice had given birth to a healthy baby boy, and of course St. Mungo's healers were still not present. Sal cursed his life. "You can deliver my child as well, can't you?" James asked nervously. "St. Mungo's is still occupied with the raid." Sal threw his future father a furious look. "Yes," he gritted out. "I can, at least theoretically." Not that Sal wanted. If he had never wanted to do something, this was it. There was no way by wind and fire that he had wanted to be the one to help his mother give birth to himself. And yet, here he was, doing just that. Of course, considering his luck in all things like that, baby Harry James ended to be a difficult birth as well. The umbilical cord is wrapped around his neck. That's bad, isn't it? Yes, Sirius, that's bad. And now let me work. It wasn't easy, and there was a moment when Sal actually feared for the life of the child, while at the same time knowing that there was no way the child would die, considering that it was him. Nevertheless, for a moment after the birth, the baby was slightly blue and not breathing. That changed with a simple rune, drawn on the child's forehead. "Is he?" James sounded hesitant and slightly nervous when he started his question before interrupting himself. "Alive and well," Sal assured him before handing the child towards his mother in the traditional way that had already started the naming ceremony at the age of the founders. Lily took the child and smiled. "Harry James," she declared, and then held out the child towards the father. James took his little boy, looking absolutely proud. "Harry James Salvatio," he said, and then handed over the child to Sirius, who seemed to be afraid to even touch the child. It was only James's fast reflexes that actually ensured that Sirius ended up holding the child at all. For a moment the future godfather stared at the child in his arms in utter confusion and the beginning of devotion. "Harry James Salvatio Amethyst," he finally declared. And for a second Sal wanted to hit his godfather. Amethyst. Amethysts. That damn man had actually gone and named Sal Amethyst. Sal had hated the female-sounding name the first time around with the Malfoys already. Now, being here with his birth parents and understanding that he had been named Amethyst all his life was indefinitely worse. Only the fact that he wouldn't be able to explain why he ended up strangling his friend kept him from actually going after Sirius for that damn name. I will get my revenge for that, Sal thought darkly. Forget any special godfather privileges. I will get revenge for that sometimes in the future. Of course, before Sal could actually start plotting Sirius' demise, healers finally turned up and stole Sal's attention away. Nevertheless, when it was finally over and the first St. Mungo's healer left after he had showed up in the early morning hours, Sal turned to Sirius with cold fury in his eyes. I'm never, absolutely never going to forgive you, he told the other man. And not just for dragging me here when I didn't want to go in the first place. Trouble in paradise? James asked, amused, in his arms a sleeping baby. Sal threw a cold and yet somewhat furious glance at the newly minted father. I'm quite sure I can include you in my revenge plans for Sirius, he told the other man. Having 2 targets instead of 1 shouldn't really matter in the long run. James raised an eyebrow and looked at Sirius. Somehow, I get the feeling he's in an even worse mood than he was just hours ago when he arrived, he said slowly. Yeah? Well, I guess distracting him by helping 2 women giving birth might have been the wrong way to improve his mood, Sirius said with a wince and looked guiltily at Sal. In my defense, I wouldn't have brought you here had I known that Alice's and Lily's boys decided to pop out right then and there. Sal rolled his eyes. There was a reason why I was anything but happy to be dragged here, he countered, threw another pointed look at James and the baby in his arms before he sighed and turned away. He couldn't actually point out to Sirius that he had known and hadn't wanted to be here because he was from the future, and Harry James was definitely related to him. For a moment he thought that Sirius had understood his pointed look, but then Sirius spoke up again. You want to hold him? Sirius offered, having seen Sal's glance. Sal stared at the other man as if he was insane. Do I look like I want to hold him? He asked the other man before shaking his head. You're mad, Pad Daddy. Oye, that's dogfather to you? Sal rolled his eyes at the other man, who had a dawning look of horrified understanding in his eyes after his automatic reply, obviously catching on. Finally bowed towards James, sent a grin at Sirius, and then vanished by apparating away with an uttered, "Dogfather, stagfather." That night, nightmares plagued Sal's mind even harder than before. A cave. In Ferry. A drowning boy. And behind it all, an old man with eyes like the moon. You're my balance. It's your decision how you balance me. But this time, I beg you to take a look at him. Sal woke up, sweating and breathing heavily. A boy. A wish. And the unbearable feeling that he had forgotten something important. Oh, how much hated Sal the word balance right now. You look distracted, Sal, Arcturus said, his face concerned. Pollux next to him leaned closer and looked at Sal with wise eyes. And you look as if you needed more than just a good night's sleep, he added, as concerned as Arcturus. Sal sighed, and he might have said nothing if he had not seen Anastasia's concerned glances in his direction ever so often. Nightmares, he finally settled on, and I can't even explain them. They don't make any sense. Do you have the sight? Pollux asked, concerned. Because if you do, I don't, Sal assured him immediately. I've never seen anything beyond what my own 2 eyes did. And yet he couldn't shake the urge and the feeling that something was about to happen that he might have the power to stop if he just opened his eyes. There's a boy, he's backed into a corner. You're my balance. It's your decision how you balance me. But this time I beg you to take a look at him. Sal shuddered and tried to free his thoughts from the cobwebs that seemed to fill his brain nowadays. Idly, Sal wondered if the feeling was partly because he had now reached a time that he already existed in. Maybe it was because there were 2 of him. Don't be an idiot, Sal told himself. You know that this shouldn't influence you at all. And yet he couldn't deny that something did, and whatever he wanted to pretend, he couldn't shake the truth. In the end, the whole thing came to a head in a different way than Sal would have ever been able to guess. That night, the dreams intensified even further. The woods surrounding Sal seemed to be darker than ever, its shadows longer, and the atmosphere was stifling, eerie and eldritch in a way that made Sal shudder. Nevertheless, his dream self continued to wander the woods surrounding him, searching for something or someone. There, a shadow in the trees, a shadow unlike the others. It seemed darker than the others, more three-dimensional than them, different in a way Sal couldn't fully grasp, yet understood instinctively anyway. Another step further and suddenly Sal understood what was different about the shadow. It wasn't one. It was a being, a living being. A person. Sal stopped, his eyes settling onto the person leaning against one of the trees, half hidden in the woods. The moment Sal's eyes met the eyes of the stranger, the man slumped further against the tree next to him. Sal's eyes narrowed and he didn't even think about looking away from the potential threat. "Salvazar," the stranger said finally, after their gaze had been interlocked for at least a minute or two. The stranger's voice was soft and foreign, yet it reminded him of a voice Sal had heard once, a long time ago. Sal frowned. The stranger leaned forward, his silvery white-looking hair gleaming in the moonlight. His face was severe and his eyes were silver in a way that Sal should recognize everywhere, and yet, no matter how sure he was that he should recognize them, he couldn't. And yet something in the stranger's eyes was recognized by Sal's dream self, because said self didn't ask who the stranger was but instead went on to another question. "Old man, what are you doing here?" Then his words registered in his mind, and it rebelled against asking a stranger a question that shouldn't have been asked that way when you didn't know someone. It was an odd feeling, a feeling as if Sal's sleeping self was warring against his waking one and winning. Because, while a part of Sal rebelled against the familiarity with a stranger he couldn't recognize, his dream self warred only with the fact that the stranger was in front of him again. "How are you here? You're dead." Sal blurted out his next words without another thought. The stranger smiled and leaned back again, hiding his face in the shadows of the tree. "It wouldn't be the first time," he agreed with Sal before sighing. "I'm sorry, Salvazar. I guess the most of what has happened to you is my fault after all." Sal watched the other man with narrowed eyes, but then he sighed and closed them tiredly. "I don't think that you're at fault in the end," he pointed out. "You weren't responsible for most of my way through time after all." The stranger sighed at that, sounding as tired and exhausted as Sal himself. "I needed you, Salvazar," he finally confessed. "You were born too late, and I needed you. You might have come to the past to close the time loop, but in the end you followed my call. I needed you, so I called you, and you came." Sal eyed the tired man with a frown. "Why?" he asked. "You had a son, an heir, and I was never anything but a happenstance, a concurrence, never asked for and only accepted because of circumstances." The answer was another sigh. "My family was touched by me. They were the coincidence. They were the concurrence," the old man replied tiredly. "I called you and you came. You were my goal, you were the one I was living for and the reason why I existed like I did." Sal stared at the stranger, basically unable to believe what he had heard. "Old man," he said slowly. The old man smiled at him sadly. "That's what I am," he replied, his silver eyes resting on Sal's, in more ways than one. Sal frowned at that. "I don't understand," he said slowly. "You're the reason why everything happened to you? The reason why Peverell stepped in when he shouldn't have? The reason why you are who you are and why the Grimms are who they are," the stranger said and smiled thinly. "If you ever wanted someone to blame for everything you had to endure, I guess I am the closest possibility to do so." Sal looked at the other man, his eyes piercing and millennia older than his body's apparent age. "You were there when I met Mungo," Sal concluded the next moment, his mind supplying a memory he hadn't remembered until a second ago. "When you met Mungo, when you exposed yourself to the white flames and when you rescued your uncle," the stranger agreed. "I was there when you died and revived the day Camelot fell. I was there on the battlefield of the Battle of the Great North Fields. I was there when you met Eloise again in the hospital. I was there always. Everywhere and especially whenever you needed me. And yet, I can't remember you," Sal pointed out, his eyes narrowed. "And yet you can't remember me," the old man agreed, a bit sadly. "You ensured I couldn't," Sal concluded, his eyes suddenly narrowing. "You will ensure it as well, this time around." "It's not yet time, Salvazar," the stranger replied. "You're still not at that point you will actually need to remember, at the point you will actually need to know." Sal sighed. If that's the case, why are you here, showing yourself to me? For a moment the old man hesitated, his gaze wandering until he was looking at something far, far away that Sal couldn't see. I'm here because I'm biased towards you, he finally confessed. I shouldn't be, but you are my balance and I need you, and therefore I'm slightly biased towards you anyway. Your balance, Sal repeated, his mind immediately catching the word he hadn't expected to hear. My balance, the stranger agreed. And that's also the reason why I decided to come and see you in the end, Sal frowned. So, what do you want? He asked, confused. There's a boy, the other man replied. He's backed into a corner. It's your decision, but I wish you to take a second look at him. A boy, Sal repeated, his eyes narrowing. You expect me to meet him, don't you? I do, and you will, the stranger replied immediately. You're my balance. It's your decision how you balance me, but this time I beg you to take a look at him. Sal just looked at the stranger. You know the future. There's a reason why you ask me, Sal said. Why ever you ask this of me? You need me to take a closer look at him. You want me to see him because I doubt that you actually tried to influence me to see someone I'd never take a look at myself. The stranger laughed at that. I always knew that you would be my perfect balance, he said, amused. I always knew it would be you I'd need to be understood by at least one person on this planet. Sal shook his head, his eyes closing while his mind drew even further conclusions. You're also not here to ensure that I take a look at the boy you want me to look at, he said slowly. You already told me that I won't remember, so the only reason you're actually talking to me is that you know I need your words in the future when I can remember them, so you decided to step in and tell them to me before I even meet the boy in question, before I decide to help him, which I will, because otherwise you wouldn't have bothered to tell me about the boy at all. You will remember, the other man replied, just like you remembered every other nightmare in the last few months. Sal shuddered. The nightmares. You are the one who sent them, he concluded. The boy, the stranger replied instead of answering. He's important. Sal looked at him. Important enough that you are willing to ensure that I remember, Sal concluded. Important enough that I'm willing to break my silence after all this time. Yes, the other man replied, and Sal couldn't help but frown. Why is he so important? He asked the stranger. The other man shrugged. For me, he isn't, he replied, and his silver eyes found Sal's green ones. For you, on the other hand, he could be very important. You're alive, no matter what else you are, and you need someone whom you can trust. The boy, just like the blacks you know, might turn out to be one of those people sometime in the future. Might? The stranger shrugged. It's your decision, he replied, but if he dies, the possibility will be lost forever, and the potential of a possibility seemed to me a good enough chance to try and save him. Sal frowned at that. Why do you even care? He countered. The stranger sighed, stepped forward and touched Sal's cheek. Because it's you and you are mine, he replied. Because I don't want you alone in the world, and because I know you need ties to this world. You will always need ties like that. No matter how long you will live. I always found those ties by myself, Sal pointed out pointedly. But there were times where you didn't have any for longer than a lifetime, the older-looking man countered. And I can't risk it, not this time around when you need those ties more than ever. Sal stared at the stranger. Why? He whispered. The stranger just smiled sadly. Because you're mine and I don't want to lose you, so I will fight to keep you, no matter how unfairly I have to act to try and do so. Sal opened his mouth, but before he could say anything else, the other man leaned forward and brushed his mouth against Sal's forehead. Beneath the stranger's lips, the part where Sal's lightning-bolt scar was once visible started to burn hotly. He felt old. It had been years ago since he had participated in a war, and this time around everything seemed to drag out. He couldn't remember fighting this long in the last war. He sighed. Albus, I'm fine, Alastair, he said, just tired. This war, all those deaths, they seem so useless right now. Albus shook his head. Maybe he was delusional with age, but sometime wondered if he had gone and done something wrong when it came to handling Tom Riddle's education. The boy back then had been a bright boy, Albus remembered, a bright yet already badly influenced boy. Even before laying his eyes on the boy, Albus had already known that the boy's caretaker had ensured that he knew what the boy was capable of before he even entered the room or met the boy himself. "He scares the other children," she had told him. "You mean he is a bully?" "I think he must be, but it's very hard to catch him at it. There have been incidents, nasty things. Billy Stubbs, Rabbit. Well, Tom said he didn't do it and I don't see how he could have done, but even so it didn't hang itself from the rafters, did it? Then there had been the story of the 2 children in the cave. They had never been quite right afterwards. It was a sad story. A child, bright, intelligent, and yet already cruel with a penchant for secrecy and domination. I can make things move without touching them. I can make animals do what I want them to do, without training them. I can make bad things happen to people who annoy me. I can make them hurt if I want to. I knew I was different. I knew I was special. Always I knew there was something." The boy had been a bit more open back then, and yet Albus had come too late to save him, but he had tried, even though the boy had already shown that he wanted independence, that he wanted to be different. "I can speak to snakes. I found out when we've been to the country on trips. They find me, they whisper to me. Is that normal for a wizard?" "It is unusual," Albus had answered after a moment's hesitation, "but not unheard of." He had tried to play it casual, not hiding his curiosity, but in the end the interest he had shown to the child hadn't been enough. Being prefect and having perfect marks hadn't been enough. Being head boy hadn't been enough. And Albus had been forced to sit by and watch the child grow into a cruel man, a man who had been capable of murder at the tender age of 15, even if Albus had never been able to prove it. "You look distracted today, Albus," Alastor said in that moment, pulling Albus out of his memories. "I somehow get the feeling that it doesn't do you any good." Albus sighed. "It's getting worse," he finally said, giving his friend something, even if it wasn't the answer the other man wanted to hear. "Voldemort is on the rise, and no matter what we do, we're incapable of stopping him. Instead, the fight seemed to drag out longer and longer." Alastor sighed. "There are people who are following him, and they drag more and more people with them into the abyss," he agreed. "You're right, it's getting worse, but we're not alone. The Ministry is doing what it can, and there is this other group Black is crushing on. We have help, even if it's not enough." Albus frowned. "The other group, they're ruthless. They don't help with the death count at all, Alastor," he pointed out with another sigh and closed his eyes. "They're efficient," Alastor countered, and Albus felt something twist inside his stomach. Death. He simply couldn't condone death, especially not when it came to killing others just because they were of a different belief than your own side. "Alastor," Albus said with a frown, "killing them isn't the answer. They're misguided. If we can show them that they're wrong, they will change." Albus was a firm believer that people could change if you just gave them the chance and means to do so. If you killed them, then that potential was lost, and Albus didn't want that. The magical world needed them just like it needed the Muggle-borns. Even Tom was just misguided once, and Albus had tried to correct his behavior. "The time is long gone when I could frighten you with a burning wardrobe and force you to make repayment for your crimes." It hurt that later on he had been forced to admit that he hadn't managed to change the path Tom had stepped on before he even turned 11 years of age. "People can change, Alastor," he added, pointing out that fact to his friend. "We just need to ensure that they do. They need lenience to do so. Voldemort, he has charisma," Alastor agreed, stopping Albus mid-sentence. "He can talk, but if his people really wanted to change, they had already done so years ago, because no matter how much you talk, your actions speak more." Albus just shook his head with a sigh, disagreeing wordlessly with Alastor. The other man was an Auror and maybe therefore didn't understand it. They could be saved, Albus was sure. After all, even Gellert was starting to change now, after he had been imprisoned in Nurmengard. Albus knew that the Death Eaters would be able to do the same if you just gave them the time to do so. No person was quintessentially evil, after all. Even Tom had started out as a young and misguided child, but he also knew that this was a point he and Alastor would always disagree on. The other man was far more inclined to see people as through and through evil than as someone who still had the potential for goodness. That didn't stop Alastor from bringing up the argument time after time. "We shouldn't try to spare them," Alastor said, and leaned forward. "If we do, we will continue to lose." Albus sighed, but before he could say anything else, the door opened and James Potter stepped inside with a frown on his face. "You wanted to speak with me, Headmaster?" he asked. Albus sent his former student a slight smile and then gestured for the chair next to Alastor. "I did," he agreed. "It pertains to the message I delivered to you a few months ago, and the safety measures we have taken to assure your family's protection." James frowned. "We talked about my family's safety last week," he pointed out to Albus. "I don't understand what else there is to say about it." "It pertains to the healer Salazar that Sirius is so fond of," Albus explained, and while James frowned, Albus still thought that the other man would listen to reason. In the end, after all, in times like that, trusting strangers was the worst thing you could do if you were hunted by the opposition. "My lord." Voldemort looked up from the table he had been working on. On the surface were maps and parchments full of names. "Any reason why you're interrupting me, Lucius?" he asked casually. Lucius bowed. "Yes, my lord," he agreed, and Voldemort couldn't help but look the other man over. Lucius Malfoy was as immaculate clothed as ever. He looked like those lords of old Voldemort had only read about in school, and acted like them as well. "There are news from the Potters. There's rumors that they're going into hiding through the means of a spell nearly lost in time." "A spell lost?" Voldemort asked, while his mind dwelt on the fact that after years of work he was finally able to actually command his troops without fearing objections. He remembered that at the beginning it had been harder. "Shouldn't we ensure that our world is safe from the Muggles?" he had told his peers back in Hogwarts. "Just look at them right now. They kill each other indiscriminately, not even bothered by the fact that they don't just kill themselves but us as well. We're not involved in their pitiful grievances. We have our own battles to fight, and yet if they come across us, they kill us all the same." It had taken some time, nearly all of his years in Hogwarts since third year, to find a support base. The time before, Voldemort didn't like to think about it. When he had come to Hogwarts, he had expected peers, but as a Muggle-born in Slytherin, it hadn't been easy. He had been forced to learn what others had grown up with as fast as possible. Under the watchful eyes of Dumbledore and the man's negative words in the previous headmaster's ears, the boy Voldemort had been back then had nearly drowned in his first years of Hogwarts. "Do you think it's wise to try and impress your peers reading these books and trying the spells contained in them, Tom? Books like that, they talk about things that shouldn't be read by young, impressionable children." Of course, it didn't help that the man showed open distrust towards Voldemort wherever they met. "Tom, I can't remember you owning this book." There had been a cool and reprimanding look from the teacher, who wasn't caring that they were in the Great Hall and all of Tom's peers were listening in. "How about you give it back to the person it belongs to, or do you want to spend your time cleaning the trophy room?" Voldemort had hated it, had resented the other man more and more over time, especially with his hands of approach when it came to anything else but the things he personally witnessed. "But Professor Umbridge tried to rip up my homework. I understand, Mr. Riddle. Nevertheless, I doubt that Mr. Umbridge would have destroyed another person's work like that." The professor had looked at the Gryffindor student until the boy shook his head. "I wouldn't," he said. "There you go, Tom. Spells like the one you tried to use aren't necessary." 20 points from Slytherin. Voldemort had hated that man, and he had been happy when he had finally found proof of an inheritance that Dumbledore could have told him about years earlier, an inheritance that finally gave Voldemort the edge he needed to establish himself in Slytherin and start his path upwards in the magical world. Of course, finding the right initiative hadn't hurt as well. "We're held back just so that the Mudbloods are able to catch up. This is our education we're talking about. Shouldn't we try to get the best there is, and not being held back by those who aren't even inclined to learn about our world?" Over time, it had been Dumbledore's agenda that had further helped his own, especially after Dumbledore had made headmaster. They actually went and changed Samhain into Halloween, Yule into Christmas. Our traditions are lost to accommodate the mudbloods, lost for a world that shouldn't even be considered when it comes to our own, nevertheless dominated. It had taken time and some insurances, but in the end, Voldemort had gotten where he needed to be to ensure his visions came true. Of course then, when he was finally about to reach his goal, another obstacle ended up in his way. A prophecy, and 2 little boys that could be his downfall. And while Voldemort expected the Longbottoms, a long line of purebloods, to finally see reason and change sides, the Potters, Charles, Fremont, James, were known for their stubbornness, their utter belief in what they thought right. Voldemort had never met a Potter except on the battlefield, but he knew the tales. Henry, against the dark wizard Morgan. Fremont, the unspeakable. Charles, the tactician, against Grindelwald. And James, a man he had crossed wands with, and who had actually managed to hold his own for a while. Dangerous, destructive, unwilling to bend. Only one other person had ever showed the same traits, had been a healer Voldemort had once met on the battlefield. He was ripped from that thought by Lucius. "We haven't found out what kind of spell they're planning to use yet, my lord," Lucius said. "But some of us who know a bit about obscure magic fear it might be the Fidelius." "The Fidelius?" asked Voldemort, his mind turning to his knowledge of obscure spells as well. "It might be more than a bit of a problem if they do," Lucius agreed. "To get the secret will be nearly impossible," Voldemort concluded. For a moment he looked down towards the maps and lists in front of him. Then he turned back around and looked at his servant. "Do everything possible to find them and stop them from hiding," he instructed. "Find the others of their little resistance. Back them into a corner. We will step up our plans. Let's draw them out." "What about the other resistance?" Lucius asked. "What about the Night Witches?" "Bring them down if you can," Voldemort answered and turned back to the maps. "If you can't, try to distract them, until we kill the Potters and either kill the Longbottoms or their changing sides. They are of lesser importance." "Yes, my lord." With that, Lucius left him to his plans. "Don't forget, Mummy loves you, Daddy loves you." The door was blasted open. "You don't understand, James. It's dangerous. Do you really want to endanger your child that way?" Sal felt frustrated. He knew what would happen. He knew that Tom Riddle was obsessed with the Potters, but he had no proof. And without proof, there was nothing he could offer to explain his anxiety. "I'm aware that it's dangerous," James replied with an eye roll. "The Dork Lord is after us. We've been in conflict with him at least 3 times, and now he's definitely trying to kill us." Sal threw James a frustrated look with his vagueness. "I can't help you if you—" "We've got it handled," James replied and waved it off. "Don't worry about us." But Sal worried. Sal had worried for months, since Harry James had been born, and while his worry had been dismissed by Lily and James as too much, at least Sirius had gotten a bit more paranoid. Sal wondered if he was the reason why they'd changed the secret keeper to Pettigrew in the end, a man Sal had never met and therefore couldn't judge. Sal balled his hands. "All right," he said, closing his eyes. "All right, but James, be careful, will you?" "We will," James agreed, now sounding a lot softer than before. "I understand that you're stressed. We all are. There've been attacks everywhere. We're barely able to counter them anymore, even with your group and ours working on it. They weren't coordinating because that would have meant to work with Dumbledore, but they definitely worked on it." Sal rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Let's go with this," he agreed, not willing or able to try and tell them the real reason. James reached out and squeezed his shoulder. "We've something planned. Lily found the spell," he tried to reassure Sal. "We're going into hiding under it in a few days' time." Sal didn't even need his foreknowledge to know which spell they were talking about. "You plan to use the Fidelius," he gathered. For a moment, James looked a bit taken aback that Sal had combined that conclusion out of his words. Then he appraised Sal a second time. "I'm surprised you came to that conclusion," he said, and Sal sighed. "Lily was researching spells for hiding. No matter what, if you don't try to build layers of wards over wards within days, something that's impossible, the only way to hide something fast and securely is the Fidelius," he pointed out. It's also obscure enough that the opposition might not know it. It wouldn't matter. They would be found anyway. Sirius will be our secret keeper, James said, and Sal looked at him sharply. I wouldn't go round and announce that in public, he reprimanded the other man. You'll never know who will overhear. James pressed his lips together and then looked pointedly around the empty field they had met in. It had been suggested by James to meet here, and Sal was keenly aware that he hadn't been invited to James and Lily's home like normally. We're also going to move, James added, and didn't look at Sal. Sirius and Lily are currently doing it. Sal closed his eyes at that admission. You're not going to tell me your new address, he concluded. James grimaced. Sirius is against it, he said. He trusts you. But, I think I know that you're not a bad kind, but I can't risk it. I'm sorry. Sal couldn't help but stare at James as if he was mad. Then he tipped his chest, displaying his healer's oath. I think, he said dryly, that this should definitely tell you the answer. James just looked at the oath for a second before he looked up into Sal's eyes again. Lily told me there are differences in your oath compared to others. She noticed it, he commented calmly. Sal closed his eyes. Of all the times, of course Sirius had known that as well. But he also knew that the other man had kept it for himself, and Sal had never expected Lily to see it. Yes, he agreed, because he couldn't deny the truth. But not one of those differences would give me the right to hurt you, or kill or betray you. We can't risk it, James said calmly, apologetically. Not with Harry, James. I'm sorry. Sal closed his eyes. His hands balled to fists. Of course. When James turned around, Sal couldn't help but speak up again. His heart arched. Tell me, he said tiredly. Is this you speaking, or are those the words of somebody else? For a moment, James hesitated. In the end, he sighed. Dumbledore doesn't know of the difference in your oath, he said, and apparated away. Nevertheless, those words had answered Sal's question. Dumbledore might not have known of the difference, but it was his mistrust speaking. Nevertheless, Sal curled into himself. It hurt. He had known that he wouldn't be able to change it, but he hadn't known that he would be thrown out of James and Lily's life like that. Never like that. He understood their fear. He understood their caution. And it hurt to know that their actions had been logical. They couldn't know the differences and what they changed with Sal's oath, and yet so utterly unnecessary. Sal didn't know how long he sat there after he had curled into himself and lost his footing, but in the end it was Anna who found him. Peter? He asked, and Sal shook his head. I'm all right, Anna. The vampire sighed and sat down next to Sal. Somehow, he said dryly, I have the feeling that you're anything but all right. You're grieving. Sal took a deep breath and wanted to deny it, just to stop and understand that that was what he did. He was grieving. He was grieving for the loss of 3 of his friends. He was grieving for the living, and that hurt the most. Because in barely a week's time, he would be grieving for the dead instead. You didn't do it just because of whatever Dumbledore said, did you? James pressed his lips together. Sirius? No, his brother in all but blood shook his head. I want to hear it from your lips, Prongs. Tell me you had a reason, and maybe I'll understand. For a moment, James had the urge to look away, but then he squared his shoulders and returned the other man's gaze coolly. His healer's oath is different. Lily noticed, and so. James stopped dead at Sirius's reply. That's your answer to that? He stared at his best friend incredulously. Sirius shrugged. I've always known that his healer's oath is different. But as much as I hate my family, I was also taught that differences don't matter. It's the similarities that do. James frowned. What are you talking about, Sirius? He asked. A difference like that could stop it from working. Sirius snorted. You and I both know that it wouldn't. It's an oath. No matter what, it's binding. Even if it might contain a bit of a difference, it's clearly a healer's oath, which means that no matter what, he's sworn to save lives and not endanger them. There was a sort of reprimand in his voice that actually stopped James and made him scrutinize his brother-in-all but blood closer. Sirius returned the gaze seriously and calmly. An oath is an oath, he repeated. You can't just go and put your distrust on that alone. James frowned. Sirius sighed. James frowned. Is there a reason why you never said anything? Sirius sighed. Because I forced him to speak about it when I panicked after you and Lily ended up buried in that cave, he confessed. He calmed me and also distracted me with it. James frowned, but he connected the dots immediately. Whatever it is, it ensures your trust in him, he concluded, and it also ensured your loyalty in such a strong way that you keep his secrets even from us. The "you normally don't" was implied. Sirius sighed. Does it matter? He countered. You already decided that he's not worthy of your trust. James winced. Even if Sirius hadn't said anything, the reprimand was clearly heard. We're not trusting Remus. We're not trusting anybody but you and Petey, he pointed out. I think that trusting somebody we barely know is risky at that. You're also trusting Dumbledore, Sirius countered. He has a slip with the secret on it. James sighed. He's the leader of the light, he countered, and while Lily doesn't really like it, she agreed that it was best that somebody had a slip of the secret just in case. Sirius looked a bit surprised at that. She doesn't like it, he asked, astonished. James sighed. She's been a bit different when it comes to some things about the Order of a few months now, he said with a sigh. I guess it's influenced by Salvus, sir. Sirius shrugged. It's Lily. I doubt she actually let somebody influence her even a bit if she hadn't found reasons to see it their way, he countered. James agreed with amusement in his eyes. You want me to change my decision, don't you? James finally asked. You want me to add Salvus Aha to the wards? Sirius winced. I understand that you want to keep Harry James safe, but I know he's no danger for my godson, believe me, Prongs. For a moment James looked at him solemnly, then he closed his eyes and sighed again. Give us a few days. I will think about it and talk with Lily. Not that I think that she won't agree. She's more on your side than on mine in this case, even if she's cautious. Sirius smiled. That's all I can ask. James nodded and decided to bring it up with Lily after Samhain. It was only another day, after all. You tell me you can lead me to them? Yes, my lord, the rat-like man whimpered, his head bowed low while he shook with fear. I was made their secret keeper today. Voldemort looked at the pathetic man in front of him. The secret keeper. They had done a Fidelius charm. For a moment Voldemort was actually impressed by the ingenuity of his opponents, then he sneered at their deep-sitting trust in the people they called friends. For a moment he contemplated his fortune. They had basically been served to him on a silver platter. Samhain would be tomorrow, and killing the Potters and his prophesied defeater on such a day. Making his final Horcrux on such a day would be fortunate, indeed, for him. For a second, that thought actually made him recoil when he had it. He had thought that before, 2 years and 1 day ago, and had ended that Samhain night nearly defeated by a man he had never met before. A stranger. A healer. Somebody who shouldn't have had the power to fight back at all. Voldemort shuddered at that thought, his mind drifting back to that moment, that one moment when he had been so sure of his victory. It had been a raid in a mixed magical and muggle village near the Forest of Dean that ended in a battle against Dumbledore's men in the middle of the woods. And while their precious leader had been occupied elsewhere, Voldemort and his troops had triumphed on the battlefield. There had been bleeding and dead Order members all around. There had been nobody up to a fight anymore. Nobody who could have stopped Voldemort anymore. At least that was what he thought until he had seen a healer kneeling above some hurt Order members who had battled Voldemort themselves that day and had only lost by chance. They had given a good fight. They had been strong. But then there were the Black Heir, the Potter heir and his mudblood lover. Voldemort had expected them to be strong and he hadn't been disappointed at all. He hadn't killed them, instead chosen to let them bleed to death while being forced to listen how the rest of their people died or fell around them. Now, barely 20 minutes later, not one of them were conscious anymore. What a pity. Nevertheless, when Voldemort had returned to them, intending to at least give the Black and Potter heirs another chance to join them, he hadn't expected to find a healer kneeling over them, assessing their injuries and stabilizing them. He hadn't expected someone to ignore him and his men to heal people. Voldemort inwardly scoffed at the less than careless way the healer was acting. He was kneeling in front of the heirs, his back vulnerable and unprotected. An easy target, with no shield to save him and nobody to watch his back. Stupid. Well, Voldemort wasn't about to disregard an easy win. He pulled his wand and shot a simple cutting curse at the healer and his patients. Oh, theoretically, Voldemort knew that healers were protected and shouldn't be harmed, but Voldemort never cared about useless traditions like that, so killing the healer wasn't something he felt sorry for. The curse came hurling at the Black and Potter heirs and their healer, and Voldemort expected to be left with a few enemies less within the next 2 seconds. A white flash. The curse rebounded from a barrier that surely hadn't been there just seconds before. The healer turned. Their eyes met, and the world fell away. The green eyes of the healer were the same shade as the killing curse. A cruel smile played on the face of the healer. The next second, a splitting headache nearly overwhelmed the Dark Lord. Memories of dozens of raids, memories of a childhood in an orphanage, memories of hundreds of dark rituals flooded the Dark Lord's mind. Voldemort cursed and fought against the mind attack the healer was conducting on him. How had that man managed to breach his occlumency shields? Who was he that he was able to do what nobody had ever done before? Until a second ago, Voldemort had been sure that the man had nothing on the Dark Lord. His magic was barely tangible and his spells had been anything but powerful. But this attack, this battle, showed a different thing to Voldemort. This healer, he might not have the magic to defeat a powerful being like Lord Voldemort, but he definitely had the will and the skill to be a danger, nevertheless. With that thought, Voldemort brought out his magical power to overwhelm what he couldn't defeat with just skill alone. A malicious smile from the healer was the answer to his increasing magical power. Then a burst of magic came from the being in front of Voldemort. Flames erupted from the earth in between them, reaching for the Dark Lord. Voldemort hissed a counter, but the flames just grew higher and wilder. The Dark Lord's eyes widened. Fiend fire. As if the healer knew what he had been thinking, he bared his teeth at him. Something worse, I assure you, he replied, as if Voldemort had spoken his guess aloud. The Dark Lord shivered. Leave my mind? It was a demand, but his voice shook, and for the first time since his descent to the top of the wizarding world, fear ruled the Dark Lord's thoughts. The healer just bared his teeth further. It was as if he was mocking Voldemort. I'm not in your mind, Tom Riddle, he countered. Voldemort snarled. Don't you dare to mock me, healer, he replied, hurling another curse toward the healer in front of him. The curse splashed against a shield Voldemort had never seen before. Again a white flash showed the moment the curse collided with the shield. The healer laughed, his laugh harsh and without joy. The fire surrounding Voldemort burned even higher, making him retreat another step. I'm not mocking you, Tom Riddle, the healer replied, his green eyes closing before opening to a poisonous green, a green that Voldemort had never seen before, a green worse than the killing curse could ever be. Something reached for Voldemort's body, slowly but surely stiffening it, turning it into stone. There was no counter, no way to stop that gaze. Voldemort couldn't turn his eyes away. He couldn't overwhelm that magic, couldn't counter it, couldn't defeat it. For a bitter second or two, Voldemort tasted utter defeat at the hands of a man so much less powerful than he. Then, with an act of utter fear-induced strength, Voldemort managed to rip his gaze away from the beings in front of him. The feeling of turning into stone vanished, but the terror stayed. Voldemort had ripped his gaze away, but now he didn't dare to look into the eyes so much like a basilisk's anymore. Something deep inside him was sure that he was just still alive, because the man in front of him was standing behind a barrier which filtered the deadly gaze of his. Voldemort shuddered. Fear was clutching his heart in a way he had never felt before. This healer was a monster. I'm more than just a monster, Tom Riddle, the healer assured him, his voice showing a kind of strained amusement that Voldemort couldn't comprehend. His face was amused, and Voldemort was sure he hadn't said any of his thoughts aloud. Stay out of my mind, Voldemort screeched, the fear now so deeply integrated in him that his body had started to shake. I'm not in your mind, the healer repeated, bitterness in his voice, and when Voldemort opened his mouth to protest what he knew was a lie, the healer continued with mock in his voice. "No, I'm not," he repeated. "It's you who is in my mind." It was as if those words finally opened Voldemort's mind to comprehension. The healer was right. He wasn't in the Dark Lord's mind. No, it was Lord Voldemort who had somehow entered the healer's mind, a mind so different, so alien that the only thing Voldemort had been able to do to protect himself was to use his own memories to shield himself. With a curse, Voldemort tried to withdraw from the vast darkness that was the healer's mind, but something stopped him, forced him to stay. And now that Voldemort knew what had actually happened, he was aware and at the mercy of the mind that surrounded him. The stranger's mind clung to Voldemort's, holding onto it and poisoning it with a darkness that even one of the darkest lords in history couldn't bear. Voldemort's mind shuddered under the onslaught of power, a power made of sureness and the knowledge of the integrated abilities and danger. The healer in front of him knew himself in a way that Voldemort had never managed to do, and was dangerous just because of it. His mind was like a trap that Voldemort had slithered into and was now hard-pressed to escape. "I will kill you for this, healer," Voldemort threatened the man. The answer was another laugh without joy. "Kill me?" the healer repeated, but his mouth didn't utter a word. It seemed that the healer wasn't bothering to speak out loud anymore now that Voldemort knew what had happened and how he had been trapped. "Kill me? Try it. Find me, and kill me if you can. You won't win anyway." Voldemort's eyes involuntarily returned to the green ones, and again his body stiffened, slowly but surely turning into stone. He ripped his gaze away, loathing the fact that he couldn't look the man in the eyes and was instead forced to look to the floor like a servant. There was no way to intimidate a being you couldn't look into the eye while threatening it. It was like a child looking at the floor in front of their parents' feet, threatening not to do whatever the parents said. "I will kill you," Voldemort repeated, his eyes locking on the healer's feet. "Do it," the healer repeated, "but until then, understand that you aren't worth my aid any longer. You went against everything my oath stands for. You went against everything our powers stand for, and I won't recognize you any longer for it." At that, a shiver ran down Voldemort's back. His wand immediately snapped towards himself, his magic in search of the curse he could feel running through his body. And yet, there was nothing different. Nothing had changed. The healer sneered at him. Then there was a mental shove, and the next moment the part of Voldemort that had been trapped by the healer was finally free of a mind that had been about to swallow him whole. A headache even stronger than before hit Voldemort, and for a moment he saw a rune glowing in the darkness of his own mind before the image faded, leaving the desperate feeling of flight behind. "Leave, Dark Lord of this time," the healer said, his voice strong and old, so old, "I have no time to kill you right now. Leave, and I will let you stay alive for now." And Voldemort knew that this was his only chance of survival. He had no defense against the poison in the other man's eyes. He had no defense against the wickedness of the other man's mind. And he had no way to circumvent whatever witchcraft the other man had used to surround his patients and himself with. "One day, I will kill you, healer." With that, Voldemort turned and apparated away, defeated for the moment. "One day you will try," was the last thing he heard before he left. "One day, Tom Riddle, you will indeed try, and that day isn't that far away anymore." Voldemort ripped his thoughts away from the past. It was over. It had happened 2 years ago, and he was even stronger now than he had been then. "I will go there on Samhain," he told the whining, whimpering man on the ground in front of him. "Call Bellatrix and the others. I need them to create a distraction for Dumbledore and his cronies." "Yes, my lord," the worm of a man whimpered and then scurried away like the rat he was. Voldemort leaned back on his throne and closed his eyes. Green eyes met his own in his memories. He had nearly been defeated back then, but he was stronger now. He was stronger now, and this time around he would win. Harry James Potter. In Voldemort's mind, a rune glowed golden. "Stand aside, girl. Stand aside, and I won't kill you." Today was the day. Saal was tired, A few months ago, the attacks had suddenly started to pick up, and from then on, they had barely gone a day without another raid or attack somewhere. Sal and his people were exhausted. But they weren't the only ones. Even the Death Eaters looked exhausted, and normally Sale didn't notice the state of the opposition if they worked against life. Walking the battlefields, searching it for wounded, working on the dying, those were Sal's days in the last months. But he wasn't the only one. Spread over the battlefields, Sal met others like him, healers, helpers, and potions masters. Most were people he didn't know or had expected to find when it came to walking the battlefields and healing the wounded. I'm not blind, and I can see you from over here. I'm not fighting. At least something. If you're already here, you can do the assessments. I know you know enough about healing to at least ensure that the dying are stabilized and treated first. On it, Pater. Some people he met were surprising. Healer. Sal looked up, just to see silver blonde and long hair. Malfoy hair. Tell me where to begin and I will at least be able to treat those with lesser wounds. Sal's gaze ran over the dark robes that clearly showed him to be a Death Eater, even though the mask was missing. I can't accept help if the help prioritizes their own fraction in the conflict. For a moment, the Malfoy Lucius, from the looks of it and the timeline, hesitated, then he nodded curtly. Equal treatment, he agreed, just grimacing slightly. It might have been the first time Sale would work with Lucius Malfoy, but by far not the last, and he wasn't the only Death Eater who partnered with Sal over the last months to treat the wounded. Of those few who actually decided to help the wounded, the most of them kept to themselves, and Sal only saw them from afar. The most also only treated their own colleagues. Nevertheless, every little bit helped, so Sal let them be and turned towards the rest of the wounded to help them instead. It were a busy kind of months, and it was only in the end that he was reminded of the date by James, who told him that he wouldn't be allowed to see the new home. The weeks after were even busier, and no matter where he was, he never saw James, Lily, or Sirius. I knew that I couldn't do anything about it, he reasoned with himself tiredly. No matter what, the past, even if it's a past only happening now, can't be changed. Are you all right, Peter? Those words actually made Sal look up. He had been in their planning room, looking over the intelligence they had collected. I'm not sure, he answered, and rubbed his eyes. The nightmares haven't stopped, and the whole last months haven't helped with my health at all. He could see his son's concern when he said that. Peter. For a moment, the other man hesitated. Then he stepped closer and went down on his knees in front of his father. Anna's eyes searched Sal's. Then the other man closed the distance and buried his head in Sal's stomach while hugging him. It's getting worse, Sal confessed. There's no night I'm not having nightmares anymore. There's no day we're not fighting and walking the battlefields anymore, and there's no minute I'm not thinking about the fact that I'll be losing friends tomorrow. His son drew him closer. I'm sorry, Peter, he whispered, but you and I know there's nothing we can do. Sal returned the hug, curled over his son. It was only a few minutes later that he became aware of the tears streaming down his face. It hurt. Losing them hurt. There were nightmares. There were raids and chaos and fight. But the worst thing was still losing them, even if he had never really seen them as his parents. I heard there are some of you who went behind my back after the raids over the last months, Lord Voldemort said and looked across the room. The Death Eaters surrounding him exchanged concerned glances. A few years ago, Voldemort would have ignored their doings. He would have turned a blind eye on their actions, condoning their neutral treatment of the wounded on the grounds that on the other side weren't just mudbloods, but also blood traitors who were as pure-blooded as his own side. But over time, Voldemort had seen the light. They couldn't be lenient. They couldn't just ignore blood traitors only for them to never learn and change. Over time, Voldemort had seen the truth. Blood traitors were blood traitors. No matter the purity of their blood, they were different from them. There was no reason to try and keep them alive. So, his Death Eaters actually helping them was something that he had to correct. So, Voldemort continued, explain to me why some of you decided to go against everything we stand for and treated mudbloods and blood traitors. Some of his Death Eaters looked nervously at each other, some showed disgust, and there were a few who just stared back at him, emotionless. Snape was the most obvious. Voldemort knew the other man had treated blood traitors, yet there was no remorse at all. So Voldemort turned to him first. "Snape," he hissed, "as far as I know, you are one of those who thought that treating blood traitors is a good idea." The younger man didn't flinch at that accusation, just returned Voldemort's gaze calmly. "I'm a sworn potions master," Snape said, not even flinching when Voldemort narrowed his eyes at him. "I'm not about to break my oaths, and they include everyone." Admittedly, the other man had guts. Nevertheless, Voldemort knew he couldn't tolerate it. He raised his wand. Snape just stared back, not moving, not saying anything. It was Lucius who spoke up before Voldemort could do anything. "He's right," he said, not looking at Snape. "As a sworn potions master, it wouldn't be a good idea for him to break his oaths." For a moment, Voldemort wanted to punish them both. Then he reined himself in. There were some things he couldn't do, and going against the tradition of swearing potions master in by magic was one of those things. The oath would have to go. Sometime in the future, Voldemort would ensure that oaths like that would be changed, but that would take some time. Nevertheless, Voldemort took it into his own hands to punish the rest of those he knew had done it as well, while Snape stood by right next to Malfoy. "Healer!" Sal looked up from his patient to see Malfoy striding towards him. "How far along are you here?" When Sal raised an eyebrow, the other man elaborated. "There's a man over there who's about to bleed out. A potions master is trying to stabilize him, but a potions master isn't a healer," Sal concluded, and broke down his dome of wards he used for his work. "Yes," the other man agreed while Sal stood up. "Follow me." When they reached the patient, a dark-haired man was kneeling next to him. Sal guessed that it was the potions master. For a second he wondered why the man looked so familiar, then he dismissed the thought and sat down on the opposite side of the bleeding aura. "Tell me what you know," he instructed, and noticed the short spike in his oath that told him it had taken a hold of the potions master's own oath. The man straightened, clearly feeling the power resonating through his own oath that told him to listen to Sal's instruction. "Most likely internal bleeding," he said. "He's paling rapidly and showing clear signs of blood loss without an obvious reason. There are potions I could try, but it would be guesswork and might end up more dangerous for him than helpful." Sal nodded and started to draw up his wards. "I will take care of it," he promised. "Tell me the potions you need." The potions master agreed. It took some time, with the potions master treating other wounded all around them and Malfoy doing the same, but in the end the aura was stabilized and Sal could move on. It was only when he nodded towards the potions master, just before leaving, that he recognized him as the man who would end up teaching potions to his young self. Severus Snape. Well, Sal guessed that he shouldn't be too surprised that he actually met the man. Sal, after all, had already reached a time when the people he knew back then already lived. Albus Dumbledore was frowning. He was sitting in his office and staring down at the grounds of Hogwarts. Something was different tonight. He couldn't say what, but something was different. It felt as if the world was holding its breath. It didn't make sense. Albus frowned. "Yes?" It was Samhain. Yes, a lot of the traditionalists believed that Samhain was one of the most important days in the year. Nevertheless, it shouldn't feel like something important was happening tonight. It shouldn't feel like something was amiss, like something was changing, warping the world into a way that Albus's mind couldn't follow. Whatever was happening, whatever was changing, it was happening, and the dark grounds of Hogwarts couldn't tell him what was going on. The air felt charged with magic all around him. It felt as if the wards were pressing down on him, as if they were charged in ways that had never been before since Albus had started at the school as a young student. He vaguely remembered Headmaster Dippet telling him that there had been a case of charged wards when a student had stood up to the Dark Lord of that time. The man had never told Albus what had happened back then, or why it had happened, and tonight there was as much explanation as he had been given back then when Dippet had made that absent comment. Albus sighed and shook his head. Maybe he was just overly tired. Midnight had passed. It was close to 1 o'clock in the morning, and something had changed since midnight. Something had happened. Or maybe that was his father's superstition Samhain that had influenced him. Nevertheless, dread settled into his stomach, more and more since midnight. Only when the clock finally stroked 1, the tension was finally released from 1 second to the next. The wards stopped humming. The magic volatilized. Whatever had charged the night vanished. And the world breathed again. It was only a few minutes later, when he was warned of the Fidelius collapsing on the Potters' home, that he finally understood what happened. Voldemort had attacked the Potters and started the prophecy. No wonder the world had held its breath that night. Salvazahor. Sal turned. He had been in the middle of the battlefield, healing people left, right, and center. He knew that voice. It took him a moment to see Sirius, swaying on his feet. The other man didn't look good. His clothing was bloody, and soot spread over half of his body. It looked like a blasting hex had hit him in the side, and some cutting curses were evenly spread over his body. He didn't look good. Sal frowned and then turned back to his current patient. The man was stabilized and would live. Nevertheless, Sal wasn't done yet. There were potions. He stopped his train of thought when he saw a black-clad potion master working on one of the wounded. "Potion master," Sal called, invoking his oath. The man looked up immediately, and Sal was surprised that he actually recognized him. Severus Snape. A man Sal hadn't seen before, and who he hadn't thought of for thousands of years. "Healer," the man agreed, showing that he had taken his oaths. A potions master's oath always worked with a healer's oath, correlating with it for the best treatment of the patients. "I need you to take a look at this man as soon as you're done with the one you're treating. I stabilized him, but he needs some potions to ensure his survival," Sal instructed. Normally he used his own potions, but with a potions master near and the way Sirius was staggering towards him, Sal guessed that it was better if he didn't. This time. "Of course," Snape replied, before the sour man turned back towards his own patient. Sal knew that Snape was a Death Eater. Sal also knew that the man he had been treating was an Auror, but it didn't matter. If Snape still reacted to his oaths, it meant that he hadn't broken them, which also meant that he had at least not poisoned others deliberately while they asked for his treatment. While the Auror in Sal's care hadn't asked for treatment, Sal had, and as a healer, his word would stand for his patients. "Thank you." With those words, Sal checked his work on the Aurors one last time and then stood up and walked towards Sirius. He was barely in time to catch the man. "What, by wind and fire, are you doing here?" he asked the other man with a frown. "Is my house there's burning over there?" Sirius slurred and then pointed at one of the burning buildings all around them. "I should be here at least and watch it burning, don't you think?" Sal sighed. "I think you have a concussion," he countered dryly. "Now let me take a look." Sirius grinned a bit loopsidedly at him. "You think?" he asked, and Sal sighed. "That just confirms it," he agreed. "Now sit down and let me take a look." It would be a long night. A very long night. And that had nothing to do with the fact that it was Samhain, and there was nothing he could do but wait and grieve and treat the wounded. No matter what he did, they were already gone. Not yet, maybe, but gone nonetheless. "Not Harry! Not Harry! Please! I'll do everything." Today was the day she would die. Sal didn't know how long he had been treating the wounded. He didn't know what time it was when he returned home. There was just one thing he knew. It was too late. He had done his best. He had healed Sirius, and then sent him on his way with a dire warning for James and Lily. It didn't matter. Sirius wouldn't reach them in time, not when he wasn't allowed to apparate, thanks to his still healing concussion and the potions working through his system. Sal could have reached them, but he hadn't been told the secret, and Sirius wasn't the secret keeper. It was heartbreaking, and yet Sal had known for centuries now that he would never be able to help them. So he helped those who were still in his power to help until he couldn't see straight anymore. It didn't matter if it was emotional exhaustion that was pulling him down more than physical. And the last people were treated, and then he returned home. He stumbled when arriving. For a moment he was tempted to go to bed and sleep, but the next he brushed that thought aside. He wouldn't be able to sleep. Not with what he knew happening, with what might have happened already that night. So in the end he decided to undergo the ritual he always did on Samhain. It was only past midnight, when the runes were freshly carved into his skin and settling, that he was finally too exhausted to stay awake any longer. Sal wasn't even sure if he actually made it to bed when he passed out. Sadly, instead of dreamless sleep, something else awaited him. The child, the stranger, leaning on the tree in a forest long since gone, told him, "You promised to take a look." Sal looked at the man who looked so familiar, yet so unrecognizable at the same time. "I can't remember," he told the other man. The answer was a warm sigh. "You remember my words," the other man pointed out warmly. "And you know yourself. I doubt that you actually need to remember your answer to know how you'd answer." Sal had to admit that the other man was right. There was no way that he would have opposed the idea of helping someone. Sal was a healer, had been a healer for longer than some countries existed, and no matter his vows he would have helped anyway. He had always been that way after all. "You're right," he agreed, and looked into the silvery eyes of the other man. A cave, danger, and a young man, more child than man, drowning in a lake full of inferi. Sal shuddered when that impression reached him. "The child," the stranger said. "Help him. You promised." The next moment it felt as if someone pushed against Sal's chest, shoving him backwards. Then the pressure on his chest vanished, and for a second it felt as if Sal was falling, but then he woke violently, his breathing fast and his eyes sightless in the dark. "Help him, you promised." A voice seemed to echo in the dark around him, and Sal shivered. His sightless eyes searched the dark for eyes full of silver, but he couldn't see anything. A cave, inferi. A boy drowning. Sal's thought process stopped. One moment he was still in bed, staring into the darkness of the night at about 1 o'clock in the morning. The next he was apparating towards a destination he had never seen before except in his dreams. There was an odd, twisting feeling, as if something was trying to prevent Sal from appearing at his destination point. Most likely everybody who had learned apparating in the current age would have been stopped, but Sal had learned an earlier, less perfected than the current version. While the current version was mostly based on wand magic, just like nearly every other magic in the present age, Sal still used the wilder version, which was less based on a wand and more solely on intent. Of course, there was also the fact that Sal was also well versed in wards, even better versed than anybody else alive, and being confronted by wards even mid-apparition was less a thing of strength and more a thing of finesse. Unraveling those parts of the wards that would have targeted his own kind of apparition wasn't too difficult, considering the wards Sal normally used when he healed. So, while most people in the current age would have been repelled or wouldn't have dared to apparate through the wards, Sal ended up exactly where he wanted to, with just a few seconds' delay. The place behind was the cave Sal had dreamed of again and again. The cave was dark. There was a lake hidden in it, with a sole little island in the middle of the lake. A single boat was currently situated on the island, but the moment Sal's feet touched the earth right after the entrance to the cave where he had ended up, the boat made its way back to the entrance. Sal stared at it for a second before deciding to ignore it. Instead, he stepped up towards the lake, as close to the water as he could without touching it, and then send a light spell at the ceiling so that he could oversee the water and the island a bit better. He looked around. The island, the lake, everything was coated with deadly silence. A child. The cave. Inferi. Sal's eyes narrowed. There was nothing there, but his gut told him otherwise. A child. Inferi. The lake. Sal's eyes roved over the water, searching. The water was still, no sign of any struggle. But the boy was there. Had to be there. Where? Before he could answer that question, a stranger stepped out of the lake in front of Sal. The shore of the lake was steep, only 5 steps in, and a grown man would have been underwater while standing. Seeing the stranger stepping out of the lake was unnerving. Pale skin, dark, wild hair that Sal was convinced should have been white. Pale eyes, glinting silver in the spare light of the cave. And his clothing so light that all in all it made him look as if the man was more ghost than man. It took a moment for Sal to connect the dark-haired stranger with the white-haired one of his dreams. The man looked younger with the darker hair. Younger, and yet more dangerous. His silver eyes were fixed on Sal's green ones. "Salve Sar," he said, and took the last step out of the water. His clothes, a white tunic and light grey trousers, looked dry to the touch. Sal stared at the man. "You're here," he whispered, and then looked around. "This isn't real." The stranger looked at Sal in amusement. "Just because I'm here, it doesn't make this unreal," he countered, amused, before crooking his head to the side. "On the other hand, it doesn't make it real either." Sal frowned. "What do you want?" he asked, ignoring the stranger's cryptic statement. "I came here just like you wanted." "You did," the stranger agreed, his eyes piercing Sal's own. "But this isn't the right way, not yet, at least." Sal opened his mouth to object and tell the man that there was only this way into the cave, when he was interrupted by the stranger without uttering even the first word. "Tell me, Salvazar," the stranger asked him, "have you ever wondered why the killing curse took the color of your eyes when it first manifested?" "What?" Sal was taken aback. "The killing curse? It was green." "Yes, but it hadn't taken the color of Sal's eyes. The color of spells was nothing that could be explained. Even after hundreds of years of studying, the colors didn't match any kind of pattern." "Don't look at me like that," the stranger said, amused. "There's always a reason." Sal frowned. "I'm a healer," he countered. "I'm a guardian. I have nothing to do with the killing curse." "You have deadly eyes," the stranger countered calmly. "You have deathly eyes." Then the stranger's expression turned into pity. "And it's time that you'll finally understand it," he said, his silver eyes in the color of ghosts, catching Sal's green ones. With that, the scenery suddenly changed around them. What once had been a cave suddenly turned into black nothingness. "What?" Sal's eyes left the gaze of the other to look around. There was nothing there, nothing but blackness. Sal shuddered. A trap? Had he walked into a trap? A trap he had managed to avoid for months, until one thoughtless action had gotten him into the grasp of the stranger in front of him. For a moment, panic swamped his mind. Then, as suddenly as it had overcome him, the panic left him. Something in him trusted the other man, trusted him more than enough to calm down and stop panicking. "Ah," the stranger said, his eyes on Sal's face. "That's good. You might not remember me, but nevertheless, you still know me." Sal frowned, his eyes returning to the stranger's face. "I'm not following," he countered. The stranger smiled. One of his hands reached out and touched Sal's face like a parent would a child. "You will?" he promised. "One day you will." Sal startled the moment the stranger's hand touched his skin. It felt like burning. It felt like fire, white flames, and tasted of ashes. He swallowed harshly. There was sadness in the stranger's eyes when Sal's gaze returned to his. "I'm sorry," the other man said, his voice soft and not quite there, more like the wind than an actual human voice. "I'm sorry, Salvazar." The next moment, the darkness around them was swallowed up by a scene Sal had never seen before. There were bodies all around them. Romans, Egyptians, Spartans, Greek, Celts, Germanic people, soldiers of different wars, 30 Years' War, 100 Years' War, Falklands War, Trojan War, First World War, Second World War, and many, many more. Sal couldn't help but look around, his eyes traveling from one body to the next. "What?" The word was spoken nearly silently, a deep-seated disbelief he couldn't fathom wedged inside his mind. "The beginning," the stranger replied, "and the end. It's a decision that has already happened and that still needs to happen." Sal frowned. "You're not explaining anything," he said, his eyes landing on the stranger in front of him. The other man smiled, his smile warm and oddly familiar. "Sometimes, explanations aren't possible to happen," the stranger countered. "Sometimes you have to live it, to understand." Sal swallowed. "I lived enough," he countered. "I've lived more than enough." "Not yet," was the cool reply. "Until now, you lived for your own merit. Now, this night, on the other hand, will be mine. Tonight you will be mine, and mine alone." Sal stiffened. "I'm nobody's," he countered while adrenaline flooded his system. To his concern, No matter how wary he immediately reacted, there was still a part in him that trusted the stranger without rhyme or reason. "I'm nobody's but my own." "Not tonight," the stranger countered. "Tonight you will do as I say. Tonight you will prove me that you're either worthy or unworthy for this life." Sal's breathing quickened at those words. "It's my life," he countered while his mind fought between fear and trust. "It's my decision what I do with it." "Just within reason," the stranger countered, "and today not at all. At least it won't be your decision what will happen with you tonight." With those words he raised his hand and the dead vanished. For a second, darkness returned, before the scenery cleared again into another one that Sal had never seen before. Sal looked around. His breathing was harsh and fast. He was standing in front of the gates of a citadel, and it took a bit, but in the end he recognized an old-fashioned Rome. "What?" he whispered to himself, his brow furrowing. "How?" "You're here for a decision," the stranger's voice answered his unfinished questions through the wind. "It's your decision, and yours alone to make today." Sal frowned at that. "My decision?" he asked. "What do you mean, my decision?" "This is history," the other man replied. "You may have lived already at that time, but back then you were nowhere near here. It's your decision now, just like you've decided in every battlefield you've ever been a part of." "I don't understand," Sal replied, his eyes searching for the stranger and not finding him. "What kind of decision should I make? And why should I make it? It's history. After all, long since over." "It doesn't matter," the stranger replied. "See it as an exercise. See it as training, as a trial, as whatever you want. It doesn't matter. This is your decision, my balance. You chose this. Once, twice, and maybe thrice. This is your decision, so you are the one who will decide." "What?" Sal countered and looked around. "What is there to decide?" He frowned, his gaze wandering through the empty streets of the city. It nearly felt like a ghost city like that. "Do they live?" the stranger's voice in the wind asked. "Or do they die?" Before Sal could ask who, he watched warriors swarming the streets. His instincts told him to follow them, so he did. He ended up in the Senate where some old men sat, wearing their best clothing and not moving at all. When one of the warriors actually pulled at one of the elders' beards in the belief the elders were statues, said elder slapped him. The scene stopped. Everything froze around Sal. And then the stranger was standing next to him watching the scene as well with hooded eyes. "Tell me, my balance," the stranger said, his hand gesturing to the elders. "Will they live or will they die?" Sal turned and stared at the stranger. "How should I know what will happen?" he asked, confused. "I wasn't there, and I have no idea when we are so. How?" "I'm not asking what will happen," the stranger corrected Sal, and there was something akin to pity in his eyes. "I'm asking what you will decide. I am asking if you will save them or let them go." Sal turned and looked at the old men. "It's not my decision to make," he countered, and shook his head. "It already happened. There is nothing I can do now. Time can't be changed." The stranger nodded. "It already happened," he agreed. "Nevertheless, I ask you, will they live or will they die?" "It's not my decision," Sal repeated, pointedly, not willing to play the games the other one wanted him to. The stranger nodded. "Die it is then," he said, and waved his hand. The scene came to life again. The warrior drew his blade and slew the elder. The others followed suit. Sal shivered. This, he had seen a lot of gruesome things happening in the past, but this was the first time he stood by and watched something like this happening. His integrated reaction didn't actually let him stand by. The moment the warrior had drawn his sword, Sal had surged forward to intercept it, but the sword had gone through him as if he wasn't there, or as if he was a ghost himself. The only thing he could do in the end was stand by and watch them slaughtered. It's history. I couldn't have done anything about it anyway, Sal tried to tell himself, but something inside him rebelled nevertheless at that thought. He was there. It might not actually be real, but it felt like that, and he hated the idea that he just stood by and watched. He hated it. "Please," he whispered, turning to the stranger, "make it stop." "It was your decision," the stranger countered, merciless. So you will have to stand by and live with the consequences, and you will have to watch what your decision resulted in." Sal shuddered. Finally, the last of the old men died by the sword, but there was no break. Instead, the scene dissolved and cleared again with the warriors now in front of the citadel. Sal could hear the children crying inside and the people pleading. The warriors in front of the citadel looked ready to go in and slaughter them all. Sal shivered again. Will they live, or will they die? The stranger asked him, his voice only heard in the wind again. "Live," he whispered. "They will live." "Good," the wind said, and Sal watched the weeks-long trial of the warriors to get in, and the final decision when both warriors and the people of Rome started to starve, of gold in exchange for freedom of the people of Rome. Only then the scene slowly started to dissolve again, but not without showing the future that was brought by the fact that those people survived. "Your decision," the wind reminded him when he saw the destruction the Romans started to wreak upon the warriors' people. "And every decision has its consequences." The scene dissolved, just to return and show another time, a time that looked like it was centuries later. Their clothes. It took a moment or two for Sal to understand that they were wearing the typical uniforms of a Roman legion. He shivered. There was a storm brewing and the woods around them were dark and deep. Nevertheless, the people in the baggage clearly weren't expecting anything to happen, and when it finally happened it was too fast for them to react. The attack was unexpected. People clothed in less sturdy clothes, like the Romans, attacked from the woods. In ambush. Sal's finger twitched. He shuddered. He wanted to do something. He wanted to help, to heal, to just do something. Sal shuddered again. "I can't," he whispered back, nearly begging with his voice alone. "I can't. Please. I can't." A horse, blinded by panic, jumped one of the earth walls the attackers had to have built before the trap sprang. The horse stumbled. There was a crunching sound, and then the horse was on the ground, its neck broken, and yet it was still alive. Sal shuddered again. "Who will live? Who will die?" The wind whispered, and Sal turned his gaze away from the horse, his hands curling into fists. "Ah," the wind said, "it is like you wish." The panicky noise of the horse cut off. Dead. The horse was dead. You can't save everyone. It was the same thing that Sal's mother Morgana had always told him. It was the same thing that Sal had known to be true for centuries already. You can't save everyone. And sometimes you had to let somebody die. "Good," the voice in the wind said. "I knew you would understand. Now, who will live, Salvazar, and who will die?" And so, Sal took a deep breath and closed his eyes again. A Roman had fallen to his feet. The man had been stabbed in the chest. Sal couldn't heal him. Sal was invisible, unable to touch, unable to do anything but watch and decide. Who will live? Who will die? The Roman died. Another decision, another choice. And with every choice, every look away, every decision, it felt as if something inside Sal was dying. He couldn't do this. He wasn't made for this. He couldn't sit by and watched, but was forced to, and no matter how much he tried for distance, it hurt so bad. And yet Sal pushed on, tried to ignore the voice in his head, which told him that this wasn't right, that he shouldn't do this, shouldn't stand there and do nothing. Yet the people died around him one after another, and in the end, with the last decision, the scenery around Sal faded again. When the scene returned, Sal felt sick to the stomach. Dead. He had looked away and let people die. He had looked away. He was a healer. He was a guardian. He was anything but made for looking away. Sal wanted to throw up. He wanted to cry, scream, and rage. And yet he couldn't. Instead, he looked up again just to see another fight. Human against human. There was no difference between them but the color of their clothes. "You decide," the stranger's voice in the wind reminded him. "Who will live and who will die?" Sal shuddered. "This shouldn't be my decision," he countered, automatically returning to what he had said once before, the truth as he understood it, and his eyes on the battlefield in front of him. "I'm a healer. I shouldn't decide who dies. I should try to keep them alive." He shook his head. his eyes clenching shut when he watched warriors go down after being stabbed. His hands twitched. He had an itch to heal, an itch to help. His hands clenched when he tried to suppress the urge to reach out, the urge to help, to step in and heal. He wouldn't be able to do anything. He was nothing but a ghost after all. All I've ever learned in my life was how to keep people alive, Sal said pleadingly, his eyes on the scene in front of him, but his thoughts by the stranger whose voice was carried by the wind. This deciding against life, it's nothing I can do. It's nothing I ever wanted to do. You're a healer, the wind countered coldly. Everything you've ever done was decide who could be saved and who couldn't. So decide. Sal shook his head. I always tried to save as many as possible, and I never gave up on anybody if I didn't have to, he countered. I never went and sat by while watching somebody die. The wind laughed. Sometimes that's all you can do, he countered. You're a healer, you know it. Sal's fists clenched even further until his palms bled. But that doesn't mean that I didn't try, he said with clenched teeth. I always tried, even if I didn't manage it, in the end. Then try, the wind countered, caressing Sal's body. Try. The next second, the wind pushed Sal from behind, forcing him to take a step forward towards the scene in front of him. Sal frowned, his head automatically turning to look behind him even if he knew that he wouldn't see anything. I'm a ghost, he countered. I already tried. No, the wind countered. You went and tried to change your decision. You didn't try to decide in another way. Sal stared at the scenery in front of him for the lack of another person to look at. For a moment he still hesitated. Then he took a deep breath and stepped forward in the middle of the battlefield. The scene parted for him, people stepping aside, leaving him to walk through their formation wherever he pleased. For a moment Sal looked around, surprised and a bit uncomfortable. Your way then, the wind told him. Do it. Stepping into the fight, trying to preserve life, it felt like coming home. Hands reached for wounds, and while he couldn't bind them or really heal them, he still could try and preserve the life as much as he was able. His eyes, wandering over the wounded, automatically assessed the dying. Some were beyond help, some were on the knife's edge, and some lightly wounded enough that Sal knew they would live without his help. He ignored the last. He treated the second. He looked away from the third except when he helped them to cross a bit easier. There were sacrifices in war, and no matter how much it hurt, Sal had known that for most of his life. When it was over, when there was finally nobody to treat anymore, only the dead and those who survived, the scene changed again, forcing Sal into the next battle. It was horror. One battle after the other. One war after the next. There was no break, no end in sight, and it didn't matter that Sal tried his best. The more he did, the more he saw those dying around him instead of those surviving. It shook him. It hurt him. And no matter how much he tried to step away from all of it mentally, he finally couldn't find the distance needed anymore to do so. He was a healer. He was a guardian. But no matter what, even he had a breaking point. And in the end, the death around him were it. Fury at the stranger who forced him, though that horror story inflamed in his chest, before it spilled over into the blackness of the dissolving scene. Stop it! Stop it! Stop it! Stop it! Sal screamed into the darkness. Whatever you want from me, I can't be it. I'm a healer, not whatever you want me to be. The stranger appeared in front of him. His silver eyes were fixed on Sal's green ones. I know who you are, the stranger countered, his voice calm in contrast to Sal's desperation and fury. I know what you are, and yet you demand this of me, Sal countered and gestured all around him. The stranger looked at him, his eyes alight with a strange silver light. Are you trying to tell me you aren't made for it? He asked. Sal's fury turned up another notch at that question. I'm a healer. The fury was making his voice hard and unrelenting. I swore not to kill people. Death is a part of life, the stranger countered. Letting someone die isn't the same as killing somebody. Letting someone die isn't better, Sal countered heatedly. I'm a healer. I'm not made to sit by and watch. And what will you do if I continue to force you? The stranger countered unimpressed. After all, I doubt you have the power to free yourself from my grasp. You're too weak." The scenery swam around them, trying to turn from the utter darkness into a new horror scene. Sal's gaze found the emotionless ones of the other man. Fury in a way he couldn't remember ever feeling lurched through his body. For a moment his whole body felt as if it had been lit alight by fire, his bones, his flesh, his veins burning with liquid fire. Then the darkness around him was lit alight by white flames. The white flames lit up the darkness and stifled the appearance of the new scene of horror. "No," Sal whispered. "No, I'm not your puppet." He didn't know what he expected, but he definitely didn't expect the reaction he got. "You're fighting," the stranger said, sounding satisfied. "Good, my balance, that's good." Sal wordlessly snarled at the other man and his white fire reacted. It pushed against the darkness, tried to overwhelm its opponent, but before it could, the darkness fought back. Light and dark clashed in an explosive way, fighting back and forth, one not able to overwhelm the other. "Tell me, my balance, how long will you be able to resist me?" the stranger asked, his silver eyes on Sal. "You and I both know you've only the maturity of a child. I'm grown, I'm strong, so how will you continue to fight back when I stop giving you the chance?" With those words, the strength of the darkness doubled. Sal braced himself. His white flames he was only controlling for the second time of his life, and still not sure how he had even produced them, leaped up and attacked. The clash was horrible. Light fought against the dark. Dark fought against the light. There was power all around Sal, in ways he had never felt before. It made him shiver, his arms and legs suddenly covered in goosebumps. And yet something inside him told him that he couldn't give up now. He couldn't give in now. Darkness spread around him, surrounded him, closed in on him, and yet his flames were still countering the attack. "Fight," the stranger said, his eyes locking with Sal's. "Fight, my balance, fight me with everything you have." Sal could feel the flames around him, burning like raging white fire, unforgiving, all-encompassing, powerful, dangerous, born of phoenix fire and dragon flame. And yet, the darkness was winning. "Fight," the stranger laughed. "You won't beat me. In the end, my balance, you will succumb." With that, the darkness crashed down on Sal, stifling his fire, drowning him in darkness. From one moment to the next, darkness was everywhere. It felt like drowning in darkness. He could feel it entering him with every breath, with every blink of his sightless eyes, with every swallow. He was dying. He could feel his body giving in. He could feel the power of the stranger taking a hold of him, like the imperious curse. A loss of free will. A loss of freedom. The darkness entered him deeper and deeper. It surrounded his chest, filled it, reached for his hands and feet, for his brain, for his heart. "You are mine." The stranger's voice seemed to resonate with the darkness, and for a second, Sal felt himself bowing to him, felt himself loosing to him. Then something started to burn. It seemed to start from his heart. No, not his heart. Deeper. And yet more on the surface as well. Runes started to glow on Sal's chest. Healer, they spelled. Guardian, they pronounced. Master, they called. And Sal's eyes lit up in answer with a burning, deathly green fire. "No," the phoenix whispered in his blood. "No," the dragon roared in his mind. "No," Sal said aloud, his eyes piercing the darkness to find the silver ones of the stranger. Ghost eyes met the eyes of the basilisk. From within Sal, the flames started to burn anew. Runes that he had been carving into his body for thousands of years lit alight with white fire. It felt like shattering. One moment, Sal was burning with flames while drowning in darkness. The next, like a mirror, it felt like something in him broke down. The darkness swirled around him, curled inside him, and in front of him, the stranger's eyes turned unreadable. In the next moment, the darkness shattered all around them in the same way. Something had shattered inside Sal. "I'm here to make a deal," the stranger's voice said, sounding like an echo. Not real, but a memory that couldn't even compare to the wind when it whispered to Sal. while the space around Sal and the stranger in front of him was filled by a forest and the night sky. "I don't deal with strangers," someone else's voice answered. There was nobody else, just voices in a forest with a night sky above. The stranger looked at Sal, his eyes unreadable, his face serious and tired. "A deal for your life and the continuation of your line," the stranger's voice, built out of nothing but a memory, added, and there was something in it that told Sal that he knew the other man would accept. "What kind of deal?" the other one asked. "I will ensure your line's life and success for the next 2,000 years if you will give me a mortal body for a time." "A body?" "A child's body, your child, with my soul. 100 years of a child for you without me ever knowing who I really am. The rest of it in my command for everything I need. 1 child, born from this body for your line, 2 children born by me for my own. This is my deal. Will you accept?" The room around them shattered like the darkness had before. Light flooded everything. And suddenly, Sal found himself standing on a battlefield that definitely wasn't happening in the presence. Sal knew that battlefield. It was in a clearing in the middle of the woods of the Forest of Dean. He couldn't remember it, but he remembered the fear in Sirius' eyes when he spoke of that day, the fear in a lot of people's eyes, when they remembered. It had been the day the Order had nearly been obliterated by Voldemort and his people, a day they had survived without ever understanding why. On the floor next to Sal, Sirius, James and Lily were lying. Sal didn't even think about it. He knelt down, his hands immediately starting to heal. He hadn't planned on being attacked. He hadn't planned on confronting Tom Riddle. And he definitely hadn't planned for a Dark Lord entering his mind. It felt odd, like an echo still cursing through him. He could feel the darkness inside him reaching out for the Dark Lord in front of him. He could feel the flames running through his runes, waiting to be used, waiting for finally being able to fight again, as if the fight just seconds ago hadn't been enough for them. There was magic all around them. Sal could feel Tom Riddle trying to fight the hold Sal and the darkness inside him had over his mind. And suddenly Salah understood what he had to do, what he finally could do, even if he had never planned to do it that way and had never found a way to do it until now in any other way. He struck. His mind used the connection to break into the other man's. There was no mercy from his side. He ignored the other man's memories. There was no time. The man in front of him might have been thrown, but Sal was under no illusion that it would last long. So Sal did what he wanted to do, hid what he needed to hide, and left the second he was done. Their entire exchange only lasted a minute or two, but no matter what, when the Dark Lord finally tumbled away, shoved out of Sal's mind, there was fear in his eyes, and utter darkness in Sal's. "Leave, Dark Lord of this time," Sal said, and he could taste the darkness in his throat and the fire on his tongue when he spoke. "I have no time to kill you right now. Leave, and I will let you stay alive for now." There was understanding in Riddle's eyes when he heard Sal's warning. He retreated, still stumbling, still afraid, and yet trying to appear like the strong Dark Lord he had always portrayed. "One day I will kill you, healer." With that, Riddle apparated away, defeated for the moment. Sal knew the other man was right. He didn't need to hear the other man's threat. He didn't need to know the other man's fear, which tasted like poison on Sal's tongue, sent to him through a mental connection he had just re-established with a runic spell inside Voldemort's mind. "One day, you will try," Sal said to the vanishing Dark Lord, bitterness and defeat in his heart as well. "One day, Tom Riddle, you will indeed try, and that day isn't that far away anymore." Even less far for Sal, who had come back from that day. He shuddered at that thought and turned towards the wounded. Sal didn't know how long it took him to heal everybody he could, quite happy that for whatever reason he could actually use his supplies, unlike when he had treated the people while trapped in the scenes of the past. It was confusing. It was incomprehensible. And yet it was like that. When he had finally assured himself that they all survived, Sal stepped back. He was tired. He wished he could go home, but he couldn't. This was the past. He was back in the past. Sal didn't understand it. How? I see you broke the circle, a voice Sal had gotten to know quite well over the last horror-filled days, weeks, centuries, whatever. Sal looked up. Flames rose around him as if called by his need to defend himself. The stranger just looked at the white flames, not bothered at all that they had sprung from earth just a finger's breadth in front of him. "You're here?" Sal whispered, and he suddenly felt cold and exhausted. "Why are you here?" The child, the stranger, leaning on a tree of the forest surrounding them. "You promised to take a look." Sal stared at him. "I tried," he said coolly. "It wasn't the right time," the stranger countered calmly. "You wouldn't have been able to help him by then." Sal's stare hardened. "The child," the stranger said, before Sal had time to object. "Help him. You promised. A cave. Danger. And a young man more child than man, drowning in a lake full of inferi." Sal shuddered when that impression reached him. He had promised, and he had tried. For a moment he wanted to tell the stranger this, then his eyes caught the light emitted from his healer's oath. He was a healer. He was a guardian. A cave. Inferi. A boy drowning. Sal's thought process eyes roamed the battlefield, all around him. Healer. Guardian. The oath on his chest. The phoenix in his veins. The basilisk in his blood. And the dragon in his mind. He had promised. Sal apparated. There was that odd twisting feeling as if something was trying to prevent Sal from appearing at his destination point again, but Sal bypassed it like the first time. He ended up in the same setup like he had been last time. The cave was dark. There was a lake, hidden in it with a sole little island in the middle of the lake. A single boat was currently situated on the island, but the moment Sal's feet touched the earth right after the entrance to the cave, where he had ended up, the boat made its way back to the entrance. Sal ignored it in favor of stepping up towards the lake again, as close to the water as he could without touching it, and then send a light spell at the ceiling so that he could oversee the water and the island a bit better. He looked around. The island, the lake, everything was still coated with deadly silence. A child. The cave. Inferi. Sal's eyes narrowed. There was still nothing there, but his gut told him otherwise. Something, supported by the healing oaths he had sworn, told him that somebody was there and that it wasn't yet too late for the person in question. A child. Inferi. The lake. Sal's eyes roved over the water, searching. The water was still, no sign of any struggle. But the boy was there, had to be there. Where? In that moment, Sal finally saw him. Robbing towards the water, coughing, and thanks to the distance silently sobbing, the boy was making his way towards his damnation. Sal growled. He took a deep breath, twisted on the spot, and apparated again. The wards tried to stop him, catch him, and throw him out, so his mind, exploiting the runes he had known for more centuries than he wanted to remember, broke through the barrier of the wards not once, but twice. It took him less time than to utilize the boat, yet too much time to save the child from the water and the inferi in it. Sal cursed. He hurried towards the water, stepped into its shallow end and reached out towards the boy. Cold, wet, and lifeless. Inferi. Sal didn't think. Fire erupted from his body, and the hand caught fire, no matter that it was still entrenched in water. Sal reached into the lake. Achio! The word he hadn't used for centuries fell from his lips, supporting his already exhausted magic when his empty hand reached out with magic and intent to grab the boy and save him. Power cut through the water and caught the drowning boy. A minute, two. There were more inferi at Sal's legs, yet they all burned. The cave was land Sal had never stepped on before. The cave, no matter its placement, wasn't a part of the isles that Sal had ever explored. His links to the land nearly non-existing in the surrounding area for at least another mile or two. The only way to empower his spell, therefore, was Sal's own nearly depleted reserves. Sal was sure he would pay for it later, but at the moment the boy had priority. His magic reached further, brushed over something living, barely living, and he pulled. It was Sal's intent more than the word he had uttered that pulled the boy from death's grasp and towards Sal. It took another minute and the life Sal could feel nearly fading before he had the shoulder of a still living being under his hand. Sal tightened his grip and pulled the boy out of the water. He stumbled backwards, the Inferi trying to drag the boy back with them from the other side and Sal struggling to keep his hold, while knowing for sure that if he lost the boy now, he would never be able to get him back. But the Inferi beings cursed through magic was stronger than Sal and his hold lessened. There was nothing he could do but one thing. Like he did with healing, he flooded the boy's body with his own magic and then lit his magic up into flames. He could smell the burning flesh of the boy when the fire hurt him as well, and for a moment, Sal's oath surged up. They reached for Sal's magic, his intent, ready to destroy him for the fact that he was about to break them to hurt an innocent. Then I bless you, child. You are a healer, you are a warrior, you are a guardian. May you heal others. May you judge their hearts. May you guide others. May you protect them from harm. Today, I name you a guardian healer, born to protect, born to judge, born to heal. But no matter the hurt he caused, the fire left the Inferi screeching and giving up their hold on the boy. Sal stumbled backwards onto the island and dragged the boy with him. His oath settled. Healer, warrior, guardian. Even if he had to hurt others to protect them, the moment Sal had managed to drag the boy far enough up the island so that the Inferi couldn't follow anymore. He drew familiar runes into the earth. Familiar protection wards rose around them, wards that Sal had used for 1,000 years to heal and to protect. His hands shook. He felt bodily exhausted from the fight with magic and intent, even if he was sure it hadn't been more than 10 minutes between the first Inferi grabbing him and him finally managing to drag them to safety. He shook the thought away and turned towards the boy. The child wasn't breathing. Sal cursed. Most likely the child had breathed in water already, not even adding the fact that the boy clearly hadn't been well before he basically handed himself over to the Inferi in the lake. Sal cursed again and then turned the boy so that he could manually reanimate him. Oh, there were spells for that. Sal knew, but he also knew that with the wards of the cave breathing down on him maliciously, it would be best to spare magic wherever he could. He didn't trust the environment around him, and as good as his wards were, chances were that there was still something out there that could breach them. Nevertheless, when the boy didn't react after nearly 5 minutes, Sal growled and then took out his wand to give magical aid, even if he had wanted to avoid it. For a second it looked that even the spell wasn't enough to rescue the boy's life. But then the boy suddenly made a gurgling sound. Sal immediately turned the boy to the side, relived when the young man threw up the dirty water onto the ground. He was less relived when he noticed the blood that was thrown up with the water. "You want to make it difficult, don't you?" he asked the boy rhetorically with a tired sigh. The barely conscious and soon back to unconscious boy didn't answer, of course. Not that Sal expected an answer. In that moment, the first Inferi threw themselves against the shields that surrounded Sal and the boy. They burned, but Sal also knew that there was no way that they would survive the attack of the Inferi if they stayed here. His wards were good, but even they wouldn't hold against an army of Inferi indefinitely, especially not without the advantage of a connection to the land. Sal pressed his fingers against the base of his nose. "You really want to make my life difficult," he told the unconscious and barely breathing boy. Sal guessed that the only reason the boy breathed on his own was the magic that Sal had used to reanimate him. Currently, he needed to stabilize him. He needed to get him to safety. More Inferi threw themselves against his shield. Sal sighed. For a moment he closed his eyes, then he opened them again and reached out to take a look at the boy's eyes, before smelling his breath. He pressed his lips together. Poison. Of course it had to be poison. And of course it had to be one that was one of the hardest to deal with in the whole world. Sometimes Sal really hated his life. He gritted his teeth, closed his eyes again, and then took a deep breath. "All right," he said to himself. "All right." He couldn't treat it right now. By wind and fire! Treating that potion would take years. He doubted that the boy would wake up any time soon. So, the only thing Sal could do at the moment was to stabilize him and get him away from here. Sal slit his wrist and then started to draw runes on the boy's wrists and neck and ankles, binding the boy's life to his own. It was the best he could do for now, at least until they were out of danger. In that moment the shield around him wavered, the Inferi throwing themselves even further against the wards. Sal wanted to curse, but he also knew that he could spare his breath. He needed to get out of there before the Inferi reached them. He closed his eyes. His reserves were low. He knew that he couldn't spare a lot of magic anymore, not if he wanted to keep the boy alive, but they need to get out of here. Sal gritted his teeth. "All right," he said tiredly. "Let's do this." He reached towards the boy, checked him over again, and then pulled out a bezoar. He ensured that the boy swallowed it down. It wouldn't save him. Sal knew that the poison wouldn't be stopped by the bezoar, but he also knew that he could at least slow the poisoning down. It was the best he could do for now. In that moment the ward surrounding them broke. Sal cursed. The Inferi reached for them and Sal could feel his magic reacting. White flames burned their hands. Sal didn't even think about what to do next. He grabbed the boy and apparated. There was no thought as to where he apparated to. There was no thought about danger, fear, or the future. The only thing he thought about was safety. He felt the world vanish around him, felt the wards try to work against him, but he slipped through like he had done before. There was a different kind of wards at the end of his apparition, but those wards, instead of trying to keep him out, reached for him like an old friend. The last thing Sal saw before he lost consciousness was the dark stone floor in a barely lit chamber, and the monkey-like face of a statue he was sure he had seen before, thousands and thousands of years ago, or maybe another few years in the future. Sal reached out towards the boy, his own body stabilizing the poisoned one of the boy. The boy was still breathing. Sal's strength left him. Then, red flames lit up just below the stone ceiling of the cave. It looked like a bird. Sal lost consciousness. Avada Kedavra, and Lily Potter's eyes closed for the last time in her life.